They got Willa. They got my daughter. I need to find her. Willa!
From acclaimed director Paul Thomas Anderson.
You can save that girl.
Today, experience what is being called the best movie of the year.
This is the end of the line. Not for you.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, Benicio del Toro, Tiana Taylor, Chase Infinity.
Let's go!
One battle after another. Now playing only in theaters. Experience it in IMAX. Rated R. Under 17 animated without parent.
You can't hide.
Finish training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Hello and welcome to Away the Podcast. It's Martin here, and we are back with another edition of On This Week, in which we take a look back at some of the memorable and not so memorable events in the history of Sunderland Association Football Club. And I am very pleased to say, for the first time in a few weeks, the band is officially back together. Yes, we are recording this live from a rooftop in Savile Row. Now we'll leave you all to make your own minds up which one of us is John, who's Paul, who's George, and which one's Ringo. So instead, I will first say hello to Chris Wynn. How are you, Chris?
Hello, mate. Well, you see, I was going more down the Blues Brothers route. I thought, you've just done a pilgrimage and got us all back together out of other podcasts or something like that. But yeah, we're all wearing shades and we're ready to go. But I have to say, Martin, I am so glad that you're back in the hosting chair, because preparing for these On This Weeks, I mean, you have to do so much work and make sure you've got a handle on everything that's coming up. So I'm very glad that you're back, mate.
Well, it's very nice to be back. Thank you, Chris. And also joining us, of course, is Andrew Smithson. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Martin. It's nice to catch up with everybody again.
It is. And we have got an awful lot to talk about this week. And thankfully, we have got the font of all things Sunderland AFC with us as well. It's Mr. Kelvin Beattie.
Well, I was expecting Rob Mason's name to come up there, not my name, Martin.
Rob was busy, Kelvin. Sorry, mate.
Dropping in as a reserve again.
To the last minute.
Thanks for that introduction.
That is quite all right. Well, we have got an awful lot to cover in this week's episode, because obviously things are really ramping up. International breaks are over and the football season's in full swing. And for our first thing to talk about today, we're going back to 1888. So obviously we're starting the week on September the 22nd. And in 1888, we played our first game against an international team. Sunderland losing 3-0 at Newcastle Road to a Canadian tourist side. 3 years later, and this is a fella who we talked about a few weeks ago, Charlie Buchan. 3 years later, in 1891, Charlie Buchan was born. If we fast forward almost 100 years, not quite 100 years, but almost 100 years, in 1987, Marco Gabbiadini was signed from York City. Now, he'd been signed up by his former boss, Dennis Smith. I think we spent about 80 grand on him. And he did all right with us. But we're going to park Marco for a little bit, because we're going to come on to him in a short while. 1990, Marco was in the side when we played Wimbledon away. We drew 2-2 with Wimbledon. That was our season back after we got promoted after Swindon's financial irregularities. I was having a little look at that game, because we were 2-0 up, and Gordon Armstrong and Peter Davenport scored in the first half. Wimbledon pulled one back, and then they got a late equaliser through John Scales, but Carlton Fairweather who obviously went on to have an awfully long connection with Sunderland and passed away very sadly a few months ago. He was in the Wimbledon side that day, and I think he was quite a big player for Wimbledon over the 80s, and unfortunately missed out on the FA Cup final through injury, I believe. But yeah, it was notable that he was in the Wimbledon side. Now, to make everybody feel quite old, 1999, Dan Ballard was born. I think I was working already in 1999. I already had a job. Little baby Daniel was getting rocked, and he's probably jumping up for near post headers straight out of the delivery suite. But there we go. He also shared his birthday. Obviously, we mentioned Charlie Buchan earlier. There's a couple of other people he shares his birthday with: Glenn Louvens and Jake Clark-Salter. So there you go, two not so notable names in Sunderland history. If we skip forward a couple of years, 2001, Niall Quinn scored 2 goals as we drew 2-2 at home to Charlton. We 1-0 down at half-time. Now, in 2007, now I remember this game really well, we drew 2-2 away at Middlesbrough. And that was the game, I don't know if you remember, where Lee Cattermole and Grant Ledbetter were pictured having a scrap. I think Cattermole had just come on as sub. But it's notable because all 4 goal scorers, and there was no own goals, all 4 goal scorers played for Sunderland. So Grant Ledbetter scored for us, as did Liam Miller. The Middlesbrough goal scorers were Julio, who refused to celebrate, I remember, and Stewart Downing. And I don't know the answer to this, but I can't think of any of the higher scoring games. There's probably been a few 1-goal games, but I can't remember a few high scoring games where all of the goal scorers have played for us.
Well, there was the game against Charlton when we scored 2 own goals.
Yeah.
Discounting own goals, I would say.
Okay, fair enough.
You know what'll happen, Martin? Halfway through Kelvin's deep dive into well, I'll not mention the game, I'll tease it. But halfway through that, me or Chris are just going to suddenly shout a random year and name, and because we'll not be listening to poor Kelvin, we'll all just be trying to go through the memory banks and think of a game where there's been more Sunderland scorers involved.
Well, logically, you'd think there must be some.
Yeah.
Logically, you'd think there must be a few where there's been, I'm not talking of 1-1 draws where the fellow who scored the equaliser played a few games for us, but, relatively high-scoring games where...
Yeah. I hate when you do this. I hate when you do this.
It just gets you thinking,
I spend the day with earworm thinking, I'm going to have to go and look that up. It's just annoying as...
I'm sure somebody listening will know.
We've had plenty of former players score against us, so it's... There'll be another example somewhere, surely. Answers... The classic question, answers on a postcard, please, ladies and gents.
Well, 2 years after that game, we played Birmingham at home in the League Cup tie. Fraser Campbell got one of our goals, and Jordan Henderson scored his first goal for Sunderland in that game. And in 2013 was also the day that Paolo Di Canio was sacked after a not so brilliant run of results. We'll move on now to September the 23rd. 1919, our right back Arthur Wright was born. He played 281 games across 18 years at the club. And obviously that was impacted a bit by World War II, a long spell where there was no proper football, I guess. 1961, we beat Scunthorpe 4-0 at home, thanks to 2 goals from George Hurd and 2 from Ambrose Fogarty. 1995, David Kelly made his debut probably about 6 years too late, really, away at Millwall after signing from Wolves for not quite £1 million, as Chris keeps liking to remind us. 1997, we played Bury away in a League Cup game. It was a second leg match. We won 2-1. It was final appearances for 2 midfield players who'd served as well. One in particular, Steve Agnew, played his last game for us. I always thought Agnew was a really good player. I always thought he was such a good... He was all action. He could score a goal. He'd pass the ball around. He was a great player. And Paul Bracewell was the other player who made his final appearance for us that day.
Yeah. Can you remember? I always remember Steve Agnew signing, because actually at the time it was quite a big money signing because we hadn't spent money in ages, and Mick Buxton hardly spent any money, but he spent money on Agnew. I always remember his debut. I can't remember who it was against off the top of my head. One of you lads might be able to tell us.
Tranmere? Tranmere?
because he came in and apparently he was struggling with the flu or something like that. And he was the best player on the pitch by a country mile.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely fantastic. And we realised, I think he came in for about $500,000 or something like that, didn't he? But I always remember his debut and just thinking, because it was touch and go whether he would play, and the manager was like, I don't know, he's struggling to make his debut. But he came in and he was absolutely fantastic. But like for the life of us, I can't remember who it was against. But I remember it was at Roker Park and it was brilliant.
I see.
Because it was a horrible day. I remember it was a horrible day. It was grey. It was wet. I mean, I know that could describe any day at Roker Park pretty much, but I remember the freezing cold day. But he was brilliant.
He was a cracking player. He played well in the game that you're going to talk about later, Chris, as well.
Really did.
But I remember the day he signed. I think it coincided with. It might have been Andy Cole or somebody of that ilk. Newcastle sold a player the same day. And I just remember the schoolyard at break time just being an absolute buzz of like, not only have Sunderland signed a good player, well, the Mags have gone and lost one of their top players. So, we were all these teenage kids absolutely over the moon. And in terms of announcements, it's a long way from how we see things now. I remember in the programme for that whatever game he made his debut, it must have been, it was just a photo of him stood outside the team bus, looking bleary-eyed, didn't have a Sunderland shirt, wasn't holding up a scarf or anything. You just think nowadays, if Sunderland sign a player, there's a whole photo shoot, whereas this just looked to have been like done on a Polaroid. Oh, Steve, just hang on 2 seconds while we get your official announcement photo taken. So yeah, very, very different days. But I've always associated Steve Agnew with that buzz when he signed because of the circumstances. And yeah, he was a cracking player for us.
No, well, he was quite a high profile player in the division, wasn't he? Because he was Leicester's captain. I found his debut. I wasn't right. I think
it wasn't. I think it was away. Yeah,
it was an away game.
Oh,
we played Oldham Athletic away, Boundary Park, drew 0-0, which sounds like a Mick Buxton sort of game. Agnew made his debut. Here's a question for, if you haven't got the lineup up in front of you before you look, Andrew and Kelvin. I think Chris has. Two ex-Sunderland, or one future Sunderland player, one, he must have been ex-Sunderland player by that time. He played for Oldham.
He just left a couple of months earlier.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Ooh,
that's a tricky one. I'll be honest.
Two ex-Sunderland players.
And we brought Agnew in to replace the fellow who left a couple of months ago.
Was it Snowden?
Yeah.
I guess him and his brother, Ian Snowden.
Well, Glyn Snowden was on Simon Grayson's staff, wasn't he? His brother Glyn was on was an assistant manager or coach under Simon Grayson. Oh,
sorry, lad. I've been distracted. I've been trying to dig out that photo of Steve Agnew. he looked almost shocked to have had that photo taken of him there.
Right, we're going to have to use that as a pod artwork. So for all of the people at home, if you have a look at the pod artwork, I don't care who else we talk about tonight, and there's some big people who we're going to talk about, but we are going to use that photo of Steve Agnew being taken by surprise by the official club photographer with his Polaroid camera.
So you need the other Oldham player, the future Sunderland player.
Oh, thank you for reminding me.
That lads haven't got.
Ooh, position
defender.
Oh, you were a bit harsh there, Martin.
Well, keep me guessing.
Ooh, you've got me.
This is tricky. This
Nicky Summerby's pal.
Oh, Chris Macon.
Chris Macon.
Very good.
Chris Macon.
Because
playing right back for Oldham. Yeah. Graham Sharp was the manager.
Just to redeem myself, I'm thinking of his home debut, which was the next league game, and it was at home to Notts County. And he came off with about 10 minutes to go because he was absolutely knackered. And bizarrely, we conceded. We lost 2-1, and we conceded a couple of minutes before he came off. And I think he was just kind of running on fumes. And actually, incidentally, in that Notts County game, another player made his debut for Sunderland. Striker Paul Williams in that game came in Came in on loan.
Palace lads, wasn't he?
Yeah.
That was when loan signings were literal loan signings. They'd be here for 30 or 31 days.
Proper
and
loan
then
signings.
they'd be away again.
Yeah.
A month or 2 months. Martin's still crying over Peter Reid.
Well, funny you mention him because he's on the list to talk about later on. Let's have a look see where we are. In the year 2000, we drew 1-1 at Liverpool. We took the lead through Kevin Phillips and Michael Owen got an equaliser. And looking through that game, it was really interesting that, you think you go away to Liverpool, take the lead, you get pegged back. And I don't think I was at this game, but you imagine it would be the sort of game where Liverpool are piling on the pressure, trying to get a late winner. We don't make any subs. Peter Reid keeps Paul Thirlwell, Eric Roy, John Oster, and Michael Reddy all on the bench. Does not change a thing, and lets the 11 who started the game play it out. And you just wouldn't see it now, would you?
Yep.
No,
but there was an element of that, wasn't there? When that old school manager, when things were tight and the players were doing their job, it's like, well, if it isn't broke, why fix it?
Yeah, and you're kind of almost afraid to make a change in case it creates a gap or does something to pull somebody out of position, don't they?
Yeah. Somebody comes on cold, not quite up to the speed of the game, and then suddenly the manager's getting pelters for bringing them on.
No, that's right. I think really sometimes did that. He was sometimes a little bit reluctant to change if things were going well, which you can kind of understand to a large extent. 2003, we played Huddersfield in a League Cup tie. Grant Ledbetter made his debut. There's a couple of interesting things in this game. Ben Clark got sent off for a handball on the line, but the referee gave the goal as well because he didn't quite keep it out, which, if my memory serves me correctly anyway, I always thought that was a really strange thing to do. I thought it was kind of one or the other. And also, John Stead scored for Huddersfield. Now, he played a lot of games at the Stadium of Light for Sunderland, and he didn't manage to score a goal at the Stadium of Light for Sunderland. That's another one where you kind of wonder, I wonder if that's ever happened before, if a striker's played double-figure games for Sunderland, hasn't managed to score for us, and then scored against us for an opposition club.
Yeah, well, yeah, I can't think of any others. There's bound to be someone. There's bound to be a whole list of them somewhere. Just going back to that red card because I can't get it out of my head now. How is it handball if it's over the line?
Well, he attempted to. So,
but then you can penalise anybody who picks the ball up the line.
I think he tried to stop it going in, and I can't remember if he tried to stop it going in, and it kind of came out and somebody put it in.
Ah, right. See, that's different. Because if he fails to stop the ball before it goes over the line, surely he can't be penalised for that. Because there's nothing to give a foul or a red card about, is there? Because he hasn't actually committed an offence.
It's a funny thing with refereeing, isn't it? Kind of going off on a complete tangent here, but this is one of the things
we'll come on to referees in a bit, Ryan. Don't worry about that.
Well, it kind of sets it up nicely. It gets us in the mood for a bit of referee criticism. But in today's game, in the modern game, the ruling seems to be, or the way the referees do it, is if I'm on a yellow card, right, and then I commit another yellow card offence, but the referee plays an advantage because the team has an advantage, he can't book me if he plays an advantage, so he can't send me off. He can give a first yellow card afterwards, but he can't give a second. If he's going to send somebody off, he's got to stop the game.
I didn't know that. And there's obviously the whole waiting thing with a second yellow card, where actually referees say, well, that's not only got to be worthy of a yellow card, but actually worthy of the red card as well, almost.
No, Mike Dean, I remember it was last season, Mike Dean was talking about on TV, and he was saying that's how it works, which I couldn't believe because it doesn't make sense at all. The Huddersfield game that we're talking about, we were 2-0 down. A lad called Tony Cars had scored for Huddersfield early on. John Stead scored after 20 minutes for Huddersfield. Kevin Kyle had equalised on 25. And then a lad called Andy Holdsworth, Kevin Kyle had scored, pulled one back on 25. A lad called Andy Holdsworth scored on 54, and Ben Clark was sent off at the same time. So it wasn't a penalty. He didn't score a penalty. He scored the goal, but Clark was sent off by Mr. Mark Cooper of the West Midlands. So, yeah, there you go. A bit of a strange one. Now, if Dan Ballard being born in 1999 made you feel old, the fact that on the 23rd of September 2005, Joe Bellingham was born. That is guaranteed to make you feel pretty old. But we are going to go back to 1978 now for our first little dive into something of note. And on this day, Kelvin apparently got very drunk. Sunderland won 2-1. Well, I said apparently. Allegedly. You can tell us whether it's true or not. But Sunderland won 2-1.
Slander.
At Burnley, Kelvin.
They did indeed. In the Battle of Turf Moor. This was. What an away game to go to. I've never, ever forgotten it. And I've been to quite a few away games. But there were a number of occurrences, both on the pitch and off, to keep you amused in this one. Unbelievable game it was. To put a bit of context on it, if people haven't got their dates and managers sorted out, Jimmy Adamson was in charge. He wasn't universally popular with our crowd. We'd had an underwhelming start of the season. We'd won 2, drawn 2 and lost 2. We were 13th going into the game. And this followed the previous season where ultimately it had been a disappointing season where we'd finished 6th, having looked at one point like we were getting a march on out of the second division. Part of the problem for Adamson, there were certainly a number of fans who felt there was just a bit too much ex-Burnley stuff going on. We had coaches that were ex-Burnley. We had a manager that was ex-Burnley, and he bought a lad called Mick Doherty, who's Tommy Doherty's son. He bought him from Burnley in after, at the time, we'd just recently had Colin Waldron and Doug Collins from Burnley as well. And to be fair, they hadn't set the grass alight when they'd been with us. Mick Doherty did. He was a good player, Mick Doherty, and he played for his jersey every time he stepped on the pitch. But he could be a fiery boy. So and certainly a bit of that was needed in this game. Jimmy Adamson was a funny time that, because I remember as a young lad, I was a young man watching this team, and he was a bit Marmite. People either liked him. I don't think anybody really loved him. He was I think they liked him, or they just didn't like what he was doing with the team. And I had a weird time with him, because every so often I could really see what he was trying to do, and I'd end up sort of sparring a bit with my fellow pals that were Sunderland fans. I'd be saying, "Oh, give him a chance, man."
I will say, Kelvin, you did call the national news and defend David Moyes, so without comment, that is
2 bits of scurrilous scandal. That yes, I did, and that tells you what sort of judge of a manager I am. But every so often, I could see what he was trying to do. He was trying to build a squad, trying to implement a style with a mix of youth and experience, and that's what I could see what he was trying to do. I wasn't as bothered about the Burnley thing. We'd had that before. Alan Brown was steeped in Burnley. He came from Burnley, and to be fair to him, he didn't do too bad a job. It didn't end well, but he did a canny job, Billy Elliott played for us and was a coach under Adamson as well, and he'd come from Burnley, so I wasn't too head up about that. But there were other people that were, they just felt it was too much, and I think some of that had to do with the players he was shipping out. So we'd seen the dismantling of the 73 cup winning team and the 75-76 promotion winning team. A lot of them lads were being moved on, shipped out, and it felt like a very obvious strategy of Adamson. Also, he had this. He kind of in public, and when you saw him being interviewed, and when you watched him at the game, and that, he always looked like he was a slightly aloof kind of character. You know, you rarely saw him sort of laughing, engaged with people in a friendly, open kind of way at the game. You know, he didn't really seem to be that kind of character. But when you do, as I've done, when you do a little bit of research and find out what he was like behind the scenes, he seems to have been to some players, he seems to have been a different kind of character. There was a warmth about him. There was definitely a direction about him. There were a number of young players who really liked him. I think Gary Rowell, who features in this game, rates him as the best coach he ever worked under. Rowell obviously worked under a number that we know of. So that's fair praise indeed. I'll take that. You see another side of people that's maybe is not publicly known, but he definitely had this aloofness about him, which didn't sit that well with fans when they were already looking at things that weren't going quite well. We had some kind of young players at the club, the likes of Sean Elliott, Kevin Arnott, Gary Rowell coming through. In this game, we had players like Rob Hindmarsh, Gordon Chisholm, Tim Gilbert, Alan Brown, Mick Cody, and a lad called Wayne Entwistle, who were brought in. And he was Wayne Entwistle was always a good one. He was people sort of call, if Joe Bolton was the first skinhead that played for Sunderland, Wayne Entwistle was the first punk rocker that played for Sunderland. So he wasn't a bad hand, Entwistle. Adamson seemed to like him because when he moved to Leeds, he took him there. The lad of Henderson, who played fullback and who'll feature, was in this game. But not all the fans were sort of buying into Adamson's plan, so this Burnley factor was kind of around and there. Coming into this game, there was a real edge to the Burnley games, primarily because Jimmy Adamson and Harry Potts, the Burnley manager, had a very sort of public falling out. Adamson had played for Harry Potts when he was the manager of Burnley the first time around, and they'd had quite a close relationship then. There were a trio. There was a third person involved in that. Bob Lord, the Burnley manager, was Burnley chairman and owner, was involved in that, and the three of them kind of moved the club forward. Obviously, Alan Brown had been the manager there as well. He'd been there when Harry Potts was a coach, and Adamson had been a player. Alan Brown was the manager, and then Harry Potts got a job, and Adamson played under him, and then coached under him. For the people that don't know as well, Jimmy Adamson, he was captain of Burnley. He was centre half. He was an Alan Brown, if I could put it this way, disciple. He was heavily influenced by Alan Brown and his coaching methods. And there's lots of evidence from players like Gary Rowell who will say on the field coaching was where this lad came into his own, So you've got the Adamson Potts thing going on. Harry Potts felt that Jimmy Adamson had stabbed him in the back after working underneath him for such a long time when Harry Potts was moved upstairs at Burnley and Adamson took over. And then obviously coming in for Bob Stokoe, when he became ill and moved away from the job, when he eventually came in he sort of left Burnley, in what seemed like in the lurch. He wasn't held in particularly high esteem for when he left Burnley, but steeped in the club. The other thing about these two lads, and Dave Merrington as well, Adamson brought Dave Merrington with them from Burnley, and they're both Northeast lads. And Harry Potts was as well. He was from Hetton-le-Houle. Adamson was from Ashington. Dave Merrington was from Newcastle. So there was a huge Northeast sort of connection. And I think I've said before, Burnley were one of the teams that used to come hunting in the Northeast for players. Certainly in the late 60s, early 70s, I can remember playing in some games where Burnley scouts were on the touchline. There were regular at schoolboy games in Newcastle where I played a bit of football. So there were a team that raided the Northeast big time. Coming into on the pitch, we had our difficulties going into the game. We had players missing. Jeff Clark, a mainstay of the team, Bob Lee, Tim Gilbert, who'd made a great start to his career, and Jackie Ashurst, who was I'm never sure whether to call him a young player or an old player. I'd say he played in the same youth team as Joe Bolton, but and played a lot of games for Sunderland. He was a steady citizen, Jackie Ashurst. He could play fullback, he could play centre half, and he had a raking shot on him as well for a defender, Ashurst. So he was missing, and he'd been playing regular. So we rolled into this game where there's already a bit of tension and a bit of nip with 4 teenagers playing. We had Mick Cody playing centre half alongside Sean Elliott. We had Gordon Chisholm, who'd been playing a bit, but he's playing in midfield. We had Alan Brown and Wayne Entwistle playing up front in what you probably would call a 4-4-2 formation for that game. And this team, when I look at it and when I think about Adamson, I think this was the kind of mix that he was aiming at. He definitely had an angle about experience and youth, and he started bringing one of the things I liked about him was I did feel like once again we had a manager and a regime that were interested in bringing youth through. Whereas I think I've said before, I loved what Bob Stoker brought to Sunderland, but I never felt that he was that, interested in the youth players. And I might be being a little bit unkind to him, but if you look who came through during his tenure, there wasn't that many young players came through during Bob Stoker's tenure. He preferred experienced Bob Stoker. But he probably would argue that most of the time he was fighting a relegation battle when he was here, which wouldn't be wrong. So into the game we go. We've got these players missing, and then we're facing this Burnley team that's got its sort of northeastern connections in the team. There was a really, really good player played for Burnley. I always rated him. And he was a lad that was born in Sunderland called Peter Noble. But he went to Blackpool and then transferred to Burnley. And he was a very good player. There was a couple of other lads, Derek Scott. He was a stake forward boy just down the road from where I come from in Morpeth. And a lad called Billy Ingham and Malk Smith were all from the northeast. So there was an edge to these games, some of them lads were Newcastle fans, some of them, Peter Noble from Sunderland. There's an edge there when you get that. Burnley had a couple of other players playing. Anybody think of a future Sunderland player that might have been playing for them? This game?
Was it Leighton James?
It was definitely Leighton James.
Well, he could be prickly, couldn't he?
He was he was shithouser extraordinaire in this game. He was at it right from kickoff. In fact, I'm sure he was at it in the bloody tunnel before he come out. What a wacky ticket he could be. I think I've said before with Leighton James, I loved him when he played for us. I hated him when he played for other teams against us. I was one of the people that would be shouting at him, get out of it, Uh, Aye. And he worked his ticket in this game, and boy, he took some stick off the visiting Sunderland fans that were there in this game. And then we're all hypocrites because a few years later we're all chanting his name, but he worked his ticket. He was one of the stars of this team. There are a couple of other lads worthy of mention in the Burnley team. Brian Hall was a handy lad, played in midfield for Burnley, but he played in the Liverpool team of the early 70s that won quite a bit of stuff. He was a very, very good player, Brian Hall. And there was a lad, reputedly the fastest forward in Great Britain. Anybody, have you anybody know who that might be? At the time, he was reputed to be the fastest forward in Great Britain. I thought we had the fastest forward at the time in Alan Brown because he was like greased lightning. But the guy was called Steve Kindon. And there'd been some kind of times taken, he'd had his sprints measured, and they reckoned that he was the fastest forward. And he could shift, like. And there was another lad who would make his name with Villa in the European in their European Cup adventure in the late 70s, early 80s, Tony Morley, who was a really nice player. Every time I saw him play for Burnley, I thought, "Wow, God, if I won the pools, I'd buy that lad for Sunderland." He was a good player. They had a very good goalkeeper as well, called Alan Stevenson. I think he was flagged up a couple of times for us. I'm sure I've got a memory of that. So that some canny players. There was some northeastern edge there as well in this game, going into the game. You'd be surprised to know. I mean, there wasn't that many people at the game. It's a horrible day, awful day, wind, rain. And in my mind's eye, I always have it that the pitch was dead treacherous. It seemed sticky in places and then really, really hard in other places. The ball seemed to be bouncing really awkwardly. There was a good away following. It wasn't that far away, Burnley, so it was always a place that you thought, I can get there in a couple of hours and get back, for a few drinks on a Saturday night, so there was about, I would have said, round about 3,500 there, but the crowd was only 12,500 as I remember it. We're making a bit of a racket with no right to be, given the start of the season, but it was an away game. That's what you do when you're a away fan. You get ripped into the singing and what have you. And we'd had a canny trip up. We'd stopped in a couple of places when you used to be able to do that, and we'd had a good trip to the ground. Little known what was what was coming. The game kicks off, and it's. I mean, honestly, Sunderland more than edged the first half. They had some good chances. We had Gary Rowe, Doherty made a great run. He was a really interesting player, Mick Doherty. I liked Mick Doherty when he played for us because he could play a number of positions. And also, he was the same height as me. So anybody that's 5'5", I'm going to get right behind them. He was a little spitfire, Mick Doherty, and a leader on the pitch. You could see that he was just one of them guys that could galvanize the team, and he was at it from start to finish. Things didn't always go his way, but he never hid. He was a lad that never hid when things weren't going right. Alan Brown hit the bar with a rake and shot and run. If you've never heard too much about Alan Brown, he was greased lightning. He was really, really quick, Brownie. Sometimes there used to be an argument about him because he used to get called super sub because he couldn't hold his a first team place down. But if you look at his stats in this season, he gets quite a few games. And I do think that Adamson quite liked him. He liked pace, he liked speed, and he kind of was trying to play a game that was a little bit more expansive and a little bit quicker breaking than maybe it's what we had been doing. So Brownie was, and I always liked him. I loved. He used to, when he scored a goal, you could tell he was in seventh heaven, and I was quite happy to go there with him. When he scored, he was a very popular. He was a popular super sub at the time when Liverpool used to have a lad called God, what was his name? Fairclough.
David Fairclough.
Used to play, yeah, David Fairclough, and
on Alan Brown. Sorry, Kelvin, just really quickly. If anybody hasn't heard the podcasts that Chris Brown, it's Under the Cosh, isn't it? That Chris Brown and John Parkin do. They had Alan Brown on, so I had Chris Brown interviewing Alan Brown. It's probably a year or two ago now. Really, really interesting. Talks about all of that time at Sunderland. It's really good listening.
I've never noticed that one. I would have a look at that because I did like Alan Brown. I loved his enthusiasm for the game. And he was a real outlet in this game. Later on, the second half, his running was a real outlet. So he hits the bar with a shot. If that had been an inch lower, would have been 1-0 up. Gary Rowell hits the post with a typical snapshot within the box. He ghosts in there. He's really good at arriving late into the box, Gary Rowell, and he goes in and just about puts the ball in the back of the net. Another inch, and that would have probably gone in off the post. That one. But we definitely have the edge. McDougherty has a great shot that pulls a great save out of Stevenson. And there's a little bit from Burnley. Steve Kindon has a running shot, and he puts daylight between him and Mick Cody. And I mean, Cody wasn't slow, but Kindon ran away from him for that chance. And Morley, he put over a couple of good crosses. And Leighton James was working his oracle. He was a great dead ball, anything, corners, free kicks. He was taking all of them, and he was working his ticket down that flank that McDougherty and Mickey Henderson were playing on. Him and McDougherty fought a running battle for most of the game. And I hadn't realised before the game, it was only afterwards, that they hadn't particularly gotten on well when they played at Burnley together. So there was that was an intriguing battle because it just looked like two fiery boys going at each other, Anyway, what caused us the difficulties? It was a feisty game, and it was being the referee. I mean, he booked 9 players and sent 2 off, and that sounds like you've got a referee that's a disciplinarian, but he wasn't. He lost control of the game from quite early on, and both teams were at it. They were pulling and pushing and fleeing into tackles that maybe they ought to have taken a little bit of time with. And as and this is a common observation that he ends up booking Mickey Henderson for instance. He books him for a challenge that was hardly worthy of a booking when there's about 10 other things going off that probably deserved a booking, and you're sitting in the stand going, are you kidding me? And the ref just lost control of the game, which added to the excitement in this game. It added to all the drama. He books Mickey Henderson, and then he books Joe Bolton. And honestly, Joe Bolton was booked loads of times, deservedly. Okay. But honestly, he books him for literally brushing the shoulder of Tony Morley, and apparently it was called a body check, and I don't even think Joe knew Tony Morley was there. He just sort of Morley smacked into him and smacked off him, and you think, why is he getting booked for that? It was absolutely bonkers, midst all the other stuff that was going on. But unfortunately, both these bookings come back to haunt where they're booked the middle of the first half, and then coming towards the end of the half, things are really hotting up. And there's a lot of there's quite a bit of nastiness. Leighton James dives and with at a Mick Doherty challenge, and I mean he really did dive. And the ref booked Leighton James for diving, which you didn't used to see an awful lot of that back then, but he deserved it. It was right in front of us, as well. I mean, he wasn't bothered, Leighton James, Some players might wait till the second half and go up to being in front of their own supporters, but it was right in front of us. We were going nuts at him. But the ref booked him, and would cheer that more than would probably cheer a goal, But it left, there was a bit of nastiness afterwards. You could see other players having a go at James, and pointing at him, and then doesn't Mickey Henderson come in and take him out? And I did think that was a foul, but I didn't think the first one was, you know what I mean? I'm sitting there watching that going, oh, Jesus, So just before half time, he sends him off. So Henderson goes off down the tunnel. Dave Merrington walks him off because there's a lot of, their fans are giving out, there's a bit of rancor on the touchline. There's a bit of stuff going off there. He starts to walk off. The ref starts the game, and Joe Bolton makes a challenge, And again, I mean, it probably deserved a booking, but the first one didn't, and he gets sent off. And so the laugh of this was then the whistle blows for half time. Joe's already walked off, and there's a great picture in I'm sure it's in one of the Sunday papers, the Sunday Sun, I think, of Joe walking off. And I mean, he just wasn't bothered either, and you can see these Burnley fans leaning over the tunnel at him, going like that. And he's just, get out the road. I'm going to the changing room.
Can I ask Kelvin quickly?
Yeah.
Because you've just got to the point where they're both sent off, right? And so they're both sent off. But we saw, the tackles that were flying in the 73 Cup final. This is what, 5 years? This is 5 years later. We then, most of us grew up with John Kay flying through people and sometimes not even a free kick being given or a yellow card. I mean, in this game, in an age where you had to assault someone to get a yellow card, in this game, there's in total 7 yellow cards and 2 red cards. Yeah. So can you try and put it into perspective? Was it deserved in that day, or are you saying, oh well, going off today's game, that or if you go off today's game, would 10 players have been sent off in this game?
Being completely objective, at that time, the 2 tackles that Henderson and Bolton made, that there were 2 bookable offences, and they got sent off for having 2. They weren't straight red cards. He got sent off for 2 bookable offences, so the ref deemed them bookable. Okay. In both their cases, I would argue that the first bookings, it was almost like the ref was going, right, the next person that does anything, I'll just book them, and that'll calm the thing down. Where it didn't, it just inflamed the situation. But people were flying into tackles. I would have said that it was Gary Rowell, after this game, and much later on when he'd finished playing, he was looking back on this game and he described it as the most violent game that he'd ever played in. So it was It was a bloody feisty game.
So what you're saying is these were red cards in this day and age. So you're talking about in 1978, it was the correct decision to send them off. No. So you're not saying that they flew in, but by these standards, everyone was doing that.
I didn't think, and would still argue that I thought the first bookings for the two lads weren't bookings, but they got booked. And I thought the second two bookings arguably probably were bookings, but not worthy of sending off.
Right.
And
to complete the circle, in today's game, that are both being sent off for the first yellow card that you thought weren't yellow cards.
in today's game, if I'd been a manager, I wouldn't have let Joe Bolton on the pitch. I'd have. He was a good footballer, Joe Bolton. Folk always say that about him. He was a good footballer. He could play football.
In terms of the number of cards given in this game, right? I've just been through every game for the rest of that season, or for all of that season. In 3 games, there was 4 yellow cards, and that was the most yellow cards given in the game. So on 3 occasions, in the rest of that season, there was 4 yellow cards dished out. Every other game had none, 1 or 2. Yeah. So for this game to have 7 yellows and 2 reds, it was completely out of the ordinary for this era.
Mm-hmm. Just before, in between one sending off and the other, I'm trying to think, was it in between or just before? I'll say it just before. Ken Knighton got booked. He was a coach who was standing there, and Mick Doherty got absolutely halved. I mean, it was an assault, and it was horrible. But I don't think the ref, there was a bit of mitigation for him there. I think he just hadn't, he was blocked, hadn't seen it.
Well, so Mick Henderson was sent off in 43. Ken Knighton was booked on 44, and Steve Kindon was booked on 44.
It was Steve Kindon that made the challenge.
So I presume that was that, and then Joe Bolton sent off in 45.
Yeah.
So
I mean, Knighton got booked for walking on the pitch to try and help Mick Doherty. He didn't wait on the ref. He just walked on and was like, and he wasn't off giving out to the ref. But Ken Knighton's an ex-Burnley boy as well, so he was fired up. He was at top door as well, you know. But the funny thing that happens here, and I mean, there was hell on in the ground, you know. You can imagine the away fans and were giving out to the referee, questioning his parentage, and giving out to the Burnley fans that were in the stand next to us, you know. And but unbeknownst to us, so Merrington walks Mickey Henderson into the dressing room, and he's talking to him. Joe Bolton comes in, and Merrington turns round, and he thinks it's half time. So he starts talking to Joe Bolton, and he's saying, like, right, Joe, second half, this is what I want, right? This is where and Joe's like looking at him, and, you know, as the halftime whistle goes, and as the other players start coming in, it's a piece from Gary Rowell that I read about this. The other players start coming in, and Merrington's giving Joe all the chat about what he wants him to do in the second half. And Joe's like trying to get a word in, and just says to him, man, I'm being sent off, you know. And yeah, apparently Merrington, who was quite an eloquent kind of lad, you know, he just sort of stopped, went wide-eyed, and sort of his jaw dropped down, and then he says, "How many fucking players have we got on the pitch? You know, how many's left? You know." And Joe just walked away and sat down, you know. And then Jimmy Adamson arrives. He'd watched the first half from the director's box. We were talking about that a couple of weeks ago. How many managers used to do that? Yeah.
Hey, do you know, I was just reading this morning, Luis Enrique talking about how good it is he's discovered watching the first half from the director's box.
Yeah.
He'd never thought about it before, apparently, but he's been looking at the rugby coaches and seeing that they go up into the stands. He did it. He's like, this is brilliant. I can see so much more of the game. I'm going to do it more often. I'm thinking, what what parallel universe are you living in where that's a new idea? Everything comes round, though. Everything
just discovered fire, hasn't
he? Adamson arrives. Now, this is a bloke that he's sort of reserved. He's not a bloke that loses his temper. The players aren't used to seeing that. He's quite aloof in his presentation. He's quite a reserved, sensibly spoken. He doesn't swear or anything like that, Jimmy Adamson. And he arrives and he's apoplectic when he comes in there, kicks the door open, comes in, apoplectic. It's a disgrace. You're a disgrace. It's, he gives this out, swearing. He's lost his temper. He absolutely tears into the whole of the team. And Gary Rowell described it as he slaughtered us in the dressing room, slaughtered us. What he didn't do was give them anything to go on in the second half. He just slaughtered them. And as he left, he said something that really got up Mick Doherty's nose. He said that they had their excuse for losing the game now, and they could just go out and do that, and off he went. And Mick Doherty wasn't having that. And there was a silence. According to Gary Rowell, he's telling the story. There's a silence, stunned silence. And then Mick Doherty stood up and said, I'm not having that. I'm not having that. And it seems like it's him, not Dave Merrington or Ken Knighton. It seems like it's him that leads. I'm not saying they don't have an input, but it's him that leads on saying, let's work. Come on, let's get stuck in. Let's see if we can do something about this. And what they decide to do is, because they think Burnley will be anticipating that they'll shut up shop, park the bus, they come up with this plan to attack. So they've 9 men, 2 men down, and they're going to go out and attack. And that's what they do. They come out in the second half. And I mean, we're giving it Laldi, in the away enclosure. We were up for it and giving it Laldi, and Doherty's fist pumping with the fans a little bit. He was canny at that, he's like, come on, yeah, come on. And the team lines up, and that's exactly what happens. They kind of go into a 4-2-2. Doherty and Wilf Rostron sort of operate on the flanks, and Wayne Entwistle and Alan Brown are up there by themselves and being asked to come back and track back, So the game kicks off, and boys are lad alive. It was like we came out, but Burnley didn't. And they kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit. I think they thought that 9 players will knock it about, will be patient, will win this game, where Sunderland just kept going at them. And Alan Brown, I have to tell you, that day, I still think that was one of his best games for us that day. He was so knackered. He came off at the finish. He came off on 80 minutes, but he ran himself into the ground. And as I say, he was so quick. He was causing a lot of problems at their defence. Gary Rowell, folk always go on about his goal scoring and his penalty taking. I tell you something that used to go under the radar about him. I always thought this about him. He had a great engine. He wasn't the absolute quickest, but that lad could run all day. He had a great engine, and that day, that's what he did. He kind of slotted into the midfield and was just running and running and running, and he wasn't a thunderous tackler. He was the kind of lad that would poke the ball away. He was but he was good at that, and good at sort of intercepting passes as well. So that you cannot believe it. Within 5 minutes of the second half, we're all, Jesus Christ, this is great. And I know it's a cliche, but the away fans were the 12th man that day. We started
Or the
making the noise.
10th man, Kelvin.
10th man. Aye, aye. Well, the two that were missing were in the stand with us, you see, by this point. So no, they weren't. I'm teasing there. Anyway, on the hour, we score a goal, unbelievably. Score a goal, fantastic. The mayhem in the away stand was unbelievable when that goal went in. And it's Alan Brown that kind of draws their centre half, a lad called Rodaway, out to the corner flag, and then just skips around him. It was his pace that he had a bit of ball control. He had one or two tricks, but it was just his sheer pace that took him past boy, beats him all ends up, puts a cross into the box, and it's like he drops the cross into space. It's whipped into space, and Gary Rowell comes from nowhere, and he was good at that, just arriving at the last minute, powers the ball in the back of the net, 1-up, absolute mayhem in the away end, and even if we went on to get beat 6-1, some of us were like, "Aye, that'll do us, we've got a goal," unbelievable. 9 minutes later, we score again. This time it's a penner, and it's Rowell again. I think it's Wayne Entwistle, if memory serves me well. He wasn't as quick as Brownie, but he was clever. He was a clever, but just a young'un, and he's bearing down on goal. And their other halfback, a lad called Thompson, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know whether the goal knocked him off, because up until that point he'd played all right, but he just takes man and ball, and clear penner. Referee gives it. Rowell steps up, gives the keeper the eyes, sends him the wrong way. I mean, Gary Rowell really missed a penner. We're 2-0 up. 2 men down and 2-0 up, and you can imagine it. You just couldn't believe it.
Just about to say as well, Kelvin, I think that tackle you mentioned by Thompson was the only tackle that didn't get a yellow card. Like you're saying, he wiped him out, but no yellow card.
He used to say that sometimes. It was interesting. I almost chipped in when you were talking about Ben Clark's handball, that and this is having come through in an era where you could just about murder somebody and give a penalty away and not even get booked or sent off. The penalty was deemed a big enough punishment. And that is what happened. It was a horrible tackle. But to be fair to the lad, he hadn't really been one of the culprits in the game. I'd actually thought he was, I thought he was having quite a cultured game up to that point. But it was an absolute head rush, I think. 2-0, brilliant. 75 minutes, Leighton James, he's free kick man. We give a free kick away. We're back sort of the wall. We're having to work really hard, but everybody's doing that. Barry Siddall, really good goalkeeper. He's making saves and catching balls and hanging on to it for as long as he can. I think I think the longest period he hung on to it was about 5 minutes at one point. But the referees would tell the keepers to hurry up. But you had a bit of license back then, I think, to do that kind of thing. They're getting more and more rused. They're losing the plot. They're pumping the balls up. And Sean Elliott at the back. I mean, Mick Cody had a good game. He was just a young lad, Mick Cody, but Sean Elliott at the back, Gordon Chisholm, he could play centre half forward in the middle of the midfield. Chisholm played really, really well alongside Gary Rowell in that midfield. But it's backs to the wall stuff. And Leighton James gets a free kick just outside the box, puts it in, it hits the wall, comes back out, and Tony Morley stabs at it, and it just comes through a ruck of players and into the back of the goal. And honestly, this is where I get selfish as an away fan in that situation. It's the last thing you need. You see, when I'm still like this when I'm watching the game, if we go 2-0 up, I hate 2-0, me. Just can we not just get another goal so that it's not 2-0 and then they score and it's 2-1. I just think, I know what's going to happen here. We're going to give the game away. So 2-1, it's a bit touchy, but actually the closest the game came to a goal was us. We broke away again. Was it Alan Brown? I don't know. I think it might have been. And he slipped the ball to Wayne Entwistle, and he was in on goal. And it could have been 3-1 easily. His shot sort of ricocheted off the keeper's shoulder and just went over the bar. And so we see the game out. And absolute limbs in that away end. And you can imagine we're delighting in, by this point, if there was 12,500 in the ground, there's only bloody 6,000 left, they've all gone home in disgust, and we are giving it laldy. The players are across to us, it was a marvelous occasion. But what made me laugh after this, and I remember this happening a couple of days afterwards, laughing about it, that Jimmy Adamson, I remembered noticing this in the papers a couple of days afterwards, and Jimmy Adamson kind of took some credit for the plan and passed some credit on to the coaches. He said, the coaches, what we decided, and the coaches said this was what we would do, and that was the tactic that worked. And when you read Gary Rowell's, and one or two others who said he came in, he let rip, he told us we were disgrace, and then he left, Now, the only thing I would say about that is he was quite a clever lad. And I don't know, and I still don't know. I would love to know what the answer to this is. And I mean, Gary Rowell says the same thing in his description of it. Did he do that on purpose? Did he do that to like get everybody's dander up and get the coaches, had this been a plan? I don't know. I would say to you that he's sort of clever enough to have thought of that, but I would also say to you, given the nip that there was at Burnley and his open hostility, the hostility that was there towards him, I'm struggling to imagine that he would have done that. I think he will have been apoplectic because of it's happened here at Burnley. It couldn't have happened at Brighton or Crystal Palace or somewhere. It's got to happen here, where he spent half his life, So marvelous event. It shoots you up to 8th. We're as happy as Linties. There's lots of singing and chanting, lots of celebrating with the players. It's a bit feisty outside the ground afterwards. It gets a bit leery outside the ground, but it doesn't spoil our night. We have a really good night, and no wonder, because it's one of the away games I've never ever forgotten. The Adamson, he does have a bit of a go. Harry Potts has a go, the Burnley manager. He says he says to the press that he would never send his team out to play like that. And I was at the game, but obviously I'm a fan. I thought it was a feisty game and that both teams were at it. I didn't think it was us kicking anything that moved and them, and so Jimmy Adamson, and he was canny like this. There was a wiliness about him with the press. He was always guarded sort of with them, but he said that in response to that, he said, no, there was no special plan. He said, I sent my team out to pass, move the ball around, and that was the plan. And in the second half, the coaches and I agreed that we would attack and maybe cause a bit of surprise. And I can tell you that I never have had a team that's lost a game with only 9 men playing against us. And I never will have a team that loses a game with only 9 men playing against us. And I mean, he's really working himself with Harry Potts there. They don't like each other, and so some of that comes out post match. It's interesting the Burnley thing. We end up playing them in the cup later on in the season. We beat them 3-1 in a league game at home, and Raul scores again. I think he scores a penalty again. And then we'll play them in the cup. And if I tell you what the run of games is here, by this point, Jimmy Adamson's gone. He leaves about, I think it's 4 games after this match. He leaves and goes to Leeds, and Dave Merrington's caretaker manager, and then he follows him to Leeds, and it's Billy Elliott and Ken Knighton are left in control. But this Burnley thing kind of rumbles on a bit, because we beat them at home in another feisty game, not as bad as the first game, but obviously there's a little edge taken out of it because Jimmy Adamson's not our manager anymore. But it is Billy Elliott and it is Ken Knighton who are they're the number 1 and the number 2 at the time. So there's plenty of Burnley connection there, and Mick Doherty's still playing. We beat them 3-1 on February the 3rd. We then played Burnley away on Feb the 21st and draw with them in an FA Cup tie. I was supposed to be going back to Turf Moor that day. I had mates that were going, but I had a shift changed at work and ended up not being able to go, which I've never forgotten either. And then on Feb the 24th, we play Newcastle at St James's Park in another brilliant away game. And I think I went to 10 away games that season. I didn't go at them all, but I went to 10, and I never saw a beat. We drew or won. It was a fantastic season away from home. We did lose some games at home, though, because having done the Mags 4-1, we then go to the replay against Burnley thinking, wow, we're in here. 37,000 turn up for that cup tie. It was a cracking crowd, cracking atmosphere until the game kicked off and Burnley beat with 3-0. So it was a massive come down after the fun and games at Newcastle. We expected Billy Elliott to get the job and Ken Knighton to be his number 2, but that wasn't how it panned out. And I did feel that Billy Elliott was hard done to there. He definitely rallied this season and turned into. I think he kept. It's sort of his plan wasn't that different to Jimmy Adamson's. There was this mix of youth and experience, and he seemed to be, pulling a tune out of all our lads, and they seemed to like him. There was a better vibe, which is a bit unfortunate. But anyway, that match became known as the Battle of Turf Moor, and it was an outstanding game to be there. Outstanding performance, outstanding results, and what a night. Yes, I did have a really good night, and I can't remember how I got home. I woke up in my bed the next morning and was just pleased that it was my bed that I woke up in.
After listening to all that, I wish after a night out I had the memory that you have, Kelvin.
It all came back to us, Chris, over a period of weeks and months. It all came back. Anyway, that was it. And I was going to give the last word to Gary Rowell, but I punted them in earlier. He did say it was much later on, when his career had finished, that it was the most violent game he ever played in. The Battle of Turf Moor.
Battle of Turf Moor. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Kelvin. I think we all feel as if we were there, and I found a picture that you referred to of Joe Bolton coming off the ground and all of the irate Burnley fans shouting and gesticulating at him. So we'll pop that into the article for this episode and on social media as well.
Brilliant.
We are going to take a very, very quick break. We will be back very soon.
New Icy Hot. Nighttime recovery. Relieves pain at nighttime while your body recovers. Icy Hot. You're so back.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
Welcome back to How We're the Podcast, and you join us for another episode of On This Week. And we have just heard all about Sunderland's game in 1978 against Burnley at Turf Moor on the 23rd of September. And we are going to go to the 24th of September now in 1887. Now, Andrew is our resident kit man. And on this day in 1887, we wore red and white stripes for the first time. We played Darlington St. Augustine's. I think previously we'd worn blue and then we'd had sort of red and white halves, Andrew, but this was the first time that Sunderland AFC took the field in what is now our traditional kit.
Yeah, it was the third game of the season. The two games before that had been at home, and yet we wore the previous red and white halves, as you mentioned. And then suddenly for the third game, all change. It's not halves, it's stripes. And I think there's been research into this. I don't think we've ever found a definitive answer why we switched to red and white halves or why we switched then to stripes. I mean, the first kits were blue and the connection there was pretty obvious because we were playing at the Blue House Field. So that makes sense. Obviously, as more teams are coming along, the game's getting developed, you perhaps need to have a more distinctive strip. But we don't know why we plumped for red and white. There doesn't seem to be any, unless Chris, do you know differently?
I was just going to maybe have a little sly dig, but maybe because Newcastle started. No. at that lot up the road, because didn't Newcastle start off playing in red and white stripes?
I don't know. They definitely played in red and white for a period. I think we even gave them an old set of kit at one point. So. Yeah,
we got it back.
Yeah, it's perhaps one that the Newcastle fans don't like to remember. But yeah, you're right. There's the Newcastle have played in red and white. To be fair, in the 50s, we borrowed kit from Newcastle. I think it was Southampton we had at Roker Park in the FA Cup, and the tradition back then was that the home team would switch colours. So Southampton come up the weir side. Obviously, they wear red and white. So we've had to quickly put the call into the mags and say, can we be Newcastle in disguise for the day and wear black and white? So yeah, there has been that link between the two clubs. You're right, Chris. And why it was red and white, I don't know. Obviously, clothing production and techniques had changed, which meant instead of just solid colour shirts, you could now have a bit of design. You could have halves. You could have stripes. Against Darlington St. Augustine's, it was a friendly, as most matches were that season. We actually, though, although it was the first sign of red and white stripes, we actually wore white shorts, and it wasn't until later months that black came in. Although, according to the papers at that point, they were not shorts; they were knickerbockers. we wore knickerbockers, seemingly. And I've got a quote here, or I did have a quote, and it may have disappeared. No, here it is. The Echo commented on the shirts. It said, The home team appeared on the field after being photographed in their new costume, a red, white, perpendicular striped jersey with, as I say, white knickerbockers. So there you go. They weren't described as stripes back at the time. It was perpendicular stripe.
Good. When you said you were giving us a quote there, Andrew, I thought it was going to be for a set of strips.
Hey, listen, if you're putting up the money, Kelvin, I'll get my hands on some strips.
Taking this advertising thing a bit too far, or not?
Yeah, but yeah. I'm gonna set up a sports shop selling red and white shirts, and I'll be happy to sell them to Sunderland fans or Newcastle fans wanting to remember their true red and white roots.
You'll not get something as catchy for the name of your business as Billy Shoes, mind.
No, that's right. We'll need to think of one, won't we? Do you remember we played Grimsby? I was at this game. We played Grimsby at Blundell Park, and it was about 1993, and we must have gone down with our red and white stripes, and obviously Grimsby playing black and white. And I presume the referee took exception to the fact that we were both going to wear stripes because he made us wear Grimsby's away kit. So I'm sure Terry Butcher and Mick Harford, two of the hardest men in football of the 80s, obviously playing for us in the 90s, but tells you something else. Two of the hardest men in football in the 80s came out wearing this pink kit, salmon pink kit. And all of us in the away end were completely stunned for a split second. And then everyone burst out going, "What the fucking hell is that?" And I think we got beaten. I'm not surprised because it was
if it's the same,
the occasion.
You talked about Mick Harford. If it was this, if I got the right game, he got sent off before half time, so he might have really not liked it and just wanted to be back in the.
Yeah, it didn't do his image any good, I don't think.
He's biting like a salmon. Yeah,
he didn't leap like one. 1892, so 5 years after we first wore red and white stripes for the first time, a brace from Johnny Campbell took his goal tally to 8 in the opening 4 games of the season as we beat Blackburn 5-0. 1946, a fella who, Kelvin, I think you mentioned in relation to Colin Todd when you were waxing lyrical about Toddo a couple of weeks ago. John O'Hare, who was born 1946.
What lad scored 2 goals on my very first game.
There you go.
At Sunderland. I'll tell you, Brian Clough stole him from us in 1967. £22,000 he paid for him. Yeah, bugger, he's just come in and stole him, man. Well, never forgiven him.
Should never have been given the opportunity to steal him in the first place.
No, he shouldn't. He's a good team player. Didn't score a lot of goals, but he was a really good team player, John O'Hare.
A few years later, another Scottish striker was born, 1962, Ali McCoist. And on the same day, we recorded our highest ever League Cup win at home, 7-1 against Oldham. Now, in 2013, we beat Peterborough in the League Cup at Stadium of Light. Giaccherini and was it called Valentin Roberge? Was it called Valentin Roberge? What was it called? I can't remember his first name. But Kevin Ball was in charge. Now, I might be on an island, a very small island, by myself with this point. But at this moment, I really, really want Kevin Ball to get the job. Now, if we talk about dubious managerial opinions, Kelvin, I can join you here because I was convinced right now was the time for Kevin Ball to get the job. I desperately wanted him to get the job, and he didn't. And that was it. That was his last chance of managing Sunderland.
Who was his backup team? Can you remember who he had around him? Because I remember having this argument in the pub and talking about it, and I was sort of sitting on the fence because we were talking about who we would have to help him. Who the backup team was, and I'm trying to remember who they were.
Well, I think at the time people moved up from kind of the youth side because everyone kind of left with the Canio.
Yeah,
and I'm
Canio
sure
had a
was it someone
stuff,
like
didn't he?
I want to say someone like was it like Elliot Dickman or someone
Quite
like
possibly.
that who was a coach from the youth side moved up and helped them out because Bawley
that
was
rings a bell. Yeah.
I don't even think he was a coach. He was working in the academy or something, wasn't he, when he got moved up?
Well, he was, and I think he come in for a caretaker spell after Wilkinson got sacked. After McCarthy got sacked, didn't he? And he kind of oversaw that run where John Stead scored at Everton. And I think he showed a little bit of kind of naivety in those games, and we got turned over by Newcastle at home, and that didn't do any favours at all. But this spell, what was it, like however many years later? It was quite a significant period of time later. What, maybe 7 or 8 years later? I actually thought he was a lot more mature in the role, and he tried to get us playing football. He got Giaccherini playing. We played Liverpool at home, I think, after this, and played really well, and we were unlucky to not win. And I thought he had a bit more about him in the second spell.
Yeah, I've just quickly looked actually, and it said the reports at the time were saying that Di Canio's backroom staff. So we had Fabrizio Paccaretta, goalkeeping coach Domenico Dorado. I can't even remember any of these. Fitness coach Claudio Donatelli and an Italian physio, all left. And so basically the backroom staff was gutted at the time. So like I said, I think it would have just been academy staff who was working alongside Kevin Ball at the time. And just looking at the really early reports when it was reported Di Canio was sacked, it had, with the bookies, apparently Roberto Di Matteo was the early favourite according to the reports when you look back, which I can't remember him being top of the bookies lists, but yeah, I think it was one of them. I mean, I don't think we can put it on the scale of the Shearer one, but it was almost like an itch we had to scratch at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think he was doing a better job than Shearer. But there you go. It's always nice to remember that Shearer relegated the Mags, and it's always nice to have that little reminder every so often.
At least Kevin Ball now hasn't had something like that on his Sunderland CV. So he's, of course, I mean, look, don't get us wrong, probably Shearer still is a legend to Newcastle fans, even though he took them down. But he'll always have that little kind of mark against him for doing that. Whereas Ball is completely clean and they say that kind of never go back. When you're a legend as a player. Dennis Smith with Stoke City, he was like, I don't want to go back.
That's true.
And so.
No, I think when Ball did oversee that relegation, I think it was all done and dusted by the time he stepped into the role, wasn't it? But I was always dead keen for him to go somewhere else and get a managerial job and see what he could actually do, and then come back to Sunderland. But he stuck around at the academy for a lot of years. 2016 and 24th of September, the earliest ever relegation was confirmed as David Moyes' Sunderland gave up a 2-0 lead after 60 minutes to lose 3-2 at Hoghton Palace. We went 2-0 up thanks to 2 goals from Jermaine Defoe. But Palace came back, and Christian Benteke, who Kevin Day mentioned on the podcast that you did with him, Chris, Benteke scored the last-minute winner. We will move on to September the 25th.
Just quickly,
Marco.
Just quickly on the 24th, just because it might be, well, it's not relevant, but it kind of leads on to one we might be talking about in a bit. But you mentioned the League Cup a couple of times there, and on the 24th of September 1996, it was Roker Park's last ever League Cup tie against Watford.
Ah, there you go.
I'll mention that because I've got a quick quiz question for you, because we beat Watford that day. So just quickly on the FA Cup, what was the last FA Cup game we won at Roker Park?
I think I know this one.
Yeah. Do you want to have a stab at it?
Atkinson with the corner?
Absolutely. It was the quarter-final in 1992 when we beat Chelsea.
Yeah.
So our last FA Cup victory was under the floodlight, quarter-final of the Cup, and Gordon Armstrong with his header from about 35 yards out.
What a way to go out.
Yeah, I think someone tied Dave Besson's shoelaces together, but a cracking header. And so what a way to go out in the FA Cup in terms of the last victory. But yeah, so on 24th, it was our last ever League Cup game at Roker Park.
I think, was it the Coca-Cola Cup against Watford? I think it was known as the Coca-Cola Cup. It was definitely the League Cup. That was a good way to sign off our last victory at Roker in that competition, because I seem to think Martin Scott scored an absolute pile driver from outside the box. Is that right? Is my memory right there?
Yeah, Martin scored after 6 minutes. Yeah. He scored the last League Cup goal at Roker Park because we got knocked out in the next round by Spurs at White Hart Lane.
Yes.
But yeah, was it the Cup? I want to say the Worthington Cup. Did it not change that?
It might have been the Worthington by then. Funnily enough, that game against Spurs, I'm pretty sure it was Kevin Ball that scored.
It gave us the lead.
Yeah.
And Sol Campbell got a last minute winner.
Yes.
Well, there you go. Anyway, just a little bit on the 24th month.
September the 25th, 1961, Roker Park staged its first League Cup tie, which is a first round replay against Bolton that we won 1-0. In 1971, I think, Andrew, when you and I were talking to Rob Mason, we talked about this a little bit. Jimmy Hamilton became Sunderland's youngest ever outfield player when he came on as sub. He was 16 years and 103 days old. And he scored after being on the field for only 5 minutes as well and became the youngest goal scorer at the first time. Became the youngest goal scorer as well, yeah.
Yeah, we did. We had a chat with Rob about that. And I think, Kelvin, you've been lucky enough in more recent times. Didn't you get to meet him?
Yeah, that's right. I chatted with him a couple of times about that. And I was at that game. It's another match that you just... Exactly how it's Roy of the Rovers stuff, come on as sub in the last 5 minutes and pop the ball in at the back stick. One of the things he did in that game, I don't know if you know the player that he beats at the back post, Jim McNabb.
No, really?
Oh, Jim wouldn't have been happy about that. But he was really, really nice chat with him, and lots of lovely stories about obviously too many to go into the day probably, but lots of lovely stories he told about that time. And he did drop him and all his fellow youth team players in it when he was interviewed by the radio. They said to him, "How will you celebrate tonight?" And he says, "We're going down to I've lost the name of the nightclub they all went to." And he said, I'll meet them. They're coming in on the bus. They've been playing at Leeds, I think the youth club were playing at. And he says, "We're all going down to such and such live on the radio." And his mates were, Jackie Ashurst, I think, was one of them, was saying, "For God's sake, Alan Brown hates us drinking, man." So he dropped them right in it. He was a lovely, lovely bloke.
I
really
think there's a couple of articles. There's an article or two, Kelvin, that you did on the website about the conversations that you had with him.
Yes,
people can go and find those. They're still on the website, and are very, very good reads. In 1982, we had our worst ever league defeat. Went down 8-0 at Watford, so we'll skip past that one quickly. 2005, we actually won a game in the top flight. We beat Middlesbrough 2-0 at the Riverside. We scored a goal very early on by the Invisible Man, and Julio Arca also scored a free kick in the second half of that game. I remember most for Nyron's back pass.
Yeah,
Nyron
on the halfway line.
Turning the halfway line, try and knock it back to somebody who was pretending to be a goalkeeper, and the ball just trickling out of play, and Mick McCarthy shaking his head. And I kind of think that summed up how that season started. 5 years to the...
Do you think Mick McCarthy had the kind of look on his face that Regis Lebris had after he put Brian Brobby on Saturday as a hold-up player?
I'm going to defend Brian Brobby. I'm going to... You know what? This is a completely different point, right? But this is something that is in my psyche, right? So I think Broby came on, unfit, hasn't played much, had a hard job to do. The amount of stick he's got already makes me even more determined to back him. I'm going to back him to the hilt now.
Me too. I'm with you.
Anybody.
I'm with you, Martin.
Because I'm just like, you know what? I'm not having that.
We said it on a pod. He came on for 20 minutes, backs to the wall for 15 of it, and he was there on the edge of the box making tackles, so he'll do for me.
That's right.
It's the Brian Clough quote, isn't it? His 12th touch is pretty good.
Lads, this could all look very foolish because peek behind the curtain. We're recording this before the Aston Villa game. If people are listening to this and he's gone and rattled in a hat-trick against Aston Villa, there'll be absolutely no criticisms of him. So just be careful what you say, lads.
Hey.
Yeah, could end up with egg on our faces, some of us. Not Martin, though, who's given him the full 100%.
No, that's absolutely right. I'm going to get his name on the back of my shirt. And Chris, to be
I
fair.
got a minute.
Yeah. Yes, sorry,
Right.
Chris is what. In fact, I'm not slagging him off. I'm happy to see what he does, but you know what Kelvin's like. He's forever writing up players, setting the sign for us. He's a bugger for that.
Give him time. Give him a chance.
I was expecting you to say no. Gav gave him some compliments there.
oh, Chris,
Go on, carry on, Martin.
That's not fair. You didn't have to bring that up.
We will fast forward 5 years from the 2005 game against Borough, 2010. Now, this was that game at Anfield where we drew 2-2, and Michael Turner rolled the ball back to Simon Mignolet, I think it was, to take a free kick. Stewart Atwell said the ball was in play. Torres went through and slotted it home. So we ended up drawing that game 2-2. Both goals from Darren Bent. 9 years later, so 2019, and you're going from some one extreme to the other in terms of names who played for us, because two very illustrious names made the debuts for us in 2019. It was a League Cup game at Sheffield United, which we won 1-0 with a really good goal from Max Power. But Lawrence de Bock and Joel Lynch both debuted for the club that night. And in 2021, on the 25th of September, Len Ashurst, obviously a very famous defender and manager of the club, passed away. He played 458 games for us as a player and managed us on 66 occasions.
Just very quickly, Martin, we did have Michael Turner in a From the Vault on Highway the podcast, and he talked about that incident. So if anyone wants to go back through the Highway the podcast episodes and find that one with Michael Turner, they can hear the man himself talk all about it.
Yes, I don't think Stewart Atwell will be on his Christmas card list.
Nope.
When Len Ashurst used to sign his signature, he used to sign his name and put 458 after it.
Yeah, right. I never knew that.
Yeah.
It's a very modern thing to do, really, isn't it?
Yeah. He was always teasing Stan Anderson as well about that. They were very good friends. He used to tease him about it.
26th of September. So this is an interesting one. 1908. Now, we played Nottingham Forest, and the ref blew 2 minutes early in the first half. At half-time, he's informed of his error, so the players came back out and played 2 minutes kicking in one direction before he called half-time again, at which point the players switched ends to play the second half. So I'm not sure you'd get away with that now with the assistant referees and adjudicators and the scoreboards and all that sort of stuff, but his watch must have taken a funny turn. 1957, we've talked about Charlie Hurley on podcasts before, so we won't talk about him too much today, but on the 26th September 1957, Charlie Hurley signed from Millwall for 18 grand. And in 2017, we got beat 5-2 at Portman Road. Billy Jones and Aidan McGeady got our goals. This was a game that Jason Steele did a not very good impression of a goalkeeper. And he did that comical dive where he sort of staggered across and tried to dive, but failed miserably. But the opening goal scorer that night for Ipswich is a former Sunderland player. Any guesses who it is?
What year was that?
Had he already played for us prior to the game? Or
2017, and yes, he'd already played for us before.
Right.
Well, Kelvin Davis didn't go back, did he?
Well, even if he had, I'm not sure he would have scored.
Oh, he scored. Sorry, I thought you meant he was in goal. Sorry.
He scored the opener.
I think that would put the absolute cap on that one. If not only did he play well against us,
that would have been the definition of typical Sunderland.
I said he was in goal.
Ooh, no,
this is.
I can't.
Roy Keane gave him his debut.
Oh, Waghorn.
Martin Waghorn.
Yeah, nice, good shout, Chris.
Now then, at the end of last week's episode, I think we did a quiz, which Andrew, even though you weren't on the pod, you supplied. Do you want to give that question an answer, because that leads nicely into the next thing we're going to talk about.
Yes, you're right. Sadly, I missed last week's episode. It was a good listen. If people haven't caught up with it yet, honestly worth digging out. Kelvin has always had a couple of good stories. I like Chris's bit about when we played Celtic in that kind of Battle of Britain. That was a really interesting one.
It was great when, the days when Scottish football was half decent and it was worth playing, wasn't it?
Chris, play nice. Play nice. You've already had a little nibble at me. Now he's given it to Kelvin. I wasn't meaning to set him up. Honestly, I did like that bit of the episode. But yes, the quiz question was that on the 26th of September 1991, we sold a player for a club record fee, and we wanted to know who the player was, who the buying club were, and how much was the fee. This is going to be a trigger warning for me, lads. This is going to be tough. It was Marco Gabbiadini we sold, unfortunately, and Crystal Palace bought him for, we believe, 1.8 million, and that is as a lad my age, that was a real hammer blow to me when that happened. I was devastated. Chris, you're a similar age to me. I dare say you remember that not so fondly.
Me and Martin's exactly the same. We've had discussions this before.
I remember walking to the bus stop to get the bus to school in absolute daze. And I turned around the corner and I seen one of the lads who I knew, who was also a Sunderland supporter, and we looked at each other and he just goes, "It's a bad day." Yeah.
Well,
yes.
Even, you might, sorry if I don't want to steal your thunder, but talking about disappointed, even Bob Murray was, because he just named a horse after him, hadn't he?
Yes, no, I hadn't. I wasn't going to touch on that, but yeah, that rings a bell.
He said, bizarrely, he said he wasn't best pleased that Dennis Smith sold him, like as if it was done behind his back or something. But he said it was only days after he just named his racehorse after him, and then we go and sell him.
Ooh.
Well, that's
who's in the bloody saddle at this club around about that time?
Who had the reins?
Yeah. I was going to say I wish I had come back, and then Chris has come up with a good one there. That's actually quite interesting, though, that Murray is claiming that he didn't know this sale was on the horizon, because as I go through this story, we do touch on areas like that. Funnily enough, the 26th of September, which was the day we sold him, I seem to recall that his debut had been on that date a few years earlier. And when I say I seem to recall, Martin very kindly mentioned it to us before we started to record. So that's a nice little bit of symmetry. He made his debut in 1987 in a quite a poor defeat to Chester City. But then a few days later, he scored 2 down at Fulham, and then we suddenly realised we had this player on our hands who really did become our star man. He was loved by the fans. If you asked anybody else in the country, a football fan, about Sunderland, Marco Gabbiadini would have been the player they'd heard of. He was a big figure for us. When he was sold, we'd just been relegated from the First Division. Gabbiadini had done well in the top flight. He'd had a couple of injuries that season, but still scored quite a few goals. I know we went down, but he did well for himself. Whenever a team's relegated, there's always whispers and assumptions that the star players are going to be sold off. But although there was whispers, there was nothing ever too concrete until kind of middle of September. The 17th of September, Chris mentioned it last week, we played against Charlton Athletic. Gabbiadini scored a hat-trick, and that kind of seems to have picked everything up again, and everyone's remembered, oh, aye, this Marco Gabbiadini lad at Sunderland's decent. You mentioned, Chris, in your interview with Jeff Brown at the weekend, that at Crystal Palace, Selhurst Park's hosted quite a few teams, hasn't it, for various reasons. One of them was Charlton. One of them was Charlton. Well, at this point, Charlton were actually playing at Upton Park. Later on in the season, Sunderland had a very memorable game when we played West Ham there in the FA Cup. But on this night, we went to Upton Park to face Charlton, who were not playing at the Valley in those days. I think there was financial issues at Charlton. I don't know the full details. So yeah, we're playing Charlton. Graham Souness was in the stands, apparently. He didn't sign any Sunderland players, but he was looking at a couple of Sunderland faces. It might have helped him come the FA Cup final at the end of the season, though, that he'd already had a scouting mission. So yeah, this game against Charlton, Gary Hours scores for us with a penalty. He beats Bob Boulder from the spot, Bob Boulder being a former Sunderland goalkeeper. After that, Charlton equalised from a corner, and there's a bit of debate about whether the ball crossed the line or not. As you mentioned previously, I think it was yourself, Martin, that said the season before, Sunderland had a real problem holding on to leads. They'd dropped points against Wimbledon in the capital. They dropped points against...
I actually wrote a piece about that season, and I think I wrote the term something like we lost more leads than Inspector Clouseau that season. It was actually, we lost the lead on 11 separate occasions. Yeah. In 11 games, we took the lead in Division 1 and didn't get anything from it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's shooting yourself in the foot. Teams are going to struggle to survive when they're giving away that many points. But yeah, we've done it at Wimbledon. We've done it against Spurs in London. So here we are. We're back in the capital. We're playing at Upton Park. We've gone ahead, and yet we've lost it. We've given away that lead. So a little bit of panic on the terraces. But in the second half, the first few minutes of the second half, Marco Gabbiadini just decides, right, forget that. Forget the fact that we struggled to maintain leads. He just ran amok. He scored the first goal seconds after the break. There'd been a bit of pinball, and he's there to react first and get a bit of a poacher's goal. 3-1. It's a classic goal from Marco. He plays a 1-2 and he races into the box and finishes it. And then the third one, to complete this 6-minute hat-trick, he's got his back to goal, but he turns really sharply and he finishes. And this is vintage Marco Gabbiadini at his blistering best. Just shows how he could turn the game in the blink of an eye almost. So I think that kind of just brings Gabbiadini back to his best. There had been whispers beforehand about potential transfer interest in him. The following day, Dennis Smith admits that he'd actually considered dropping Marco because his form had perhaps slipped slightly due to the speculation. But he stuck with him, and it's paid off because he's had this massive influence on the game, and he's seen Sunderland win. To be fair, there was other players in the team that night, Gary Bennett, Kevin Ball-again, who we've mentioned, Tony Norman. They were rock solid. We did have the nucleus of a good side, but you know what it's like when you get relegated. Sometimes the hangover continues, and this idea about Smith, does he need to inject some new blood, keeps coming back. It keeps getting mentioned. So there's a bit of context around this. By the 20th, yeah.
Just quickly on that point, it's worth saying, talking about new blood. Every single player in that starting 11, and the two substitutes, other than actually looking at Peter Davenport and Kevin Ball came in the start of the season before. Every other player were involved in the promotion the season before that.
Yeah.
So there was literally no new signings for this new season.
Yeah, yeah. And that would be unthinkable now, wouldn't it, Chris? I mean, just a completely different way of building squads. We've said about Smith before that he would often do this. He would take time and he was happy to put the building blocks in place over a period. But yeah, there's this context around things. Also, at that point, Kieran Brady is struggling for fitness. I remember, I think both you, Martin, and Chris have mentioned that great quote about which chin was he talking from.
Well, I raised it because Martin went through the archives and found those brilliant quotes, and I mentioned the other way.
Different.
Yeah. Yes.
Just very quickly, Andrew, because Dennis Smith says himself in his book he says, he says, we kept a clean sheet at Barnsley where our 3 goals gave us a good win, and at Charlton we went one better, netting 4 goals. Marco Gabbiadini bagged a classic striker's hat-trick in that game. He was still producing the goods, and that had crystallised a plan in my mind. No funds had been forthcoming once again over the summer, the second consecutive close season where this has been the case. My hands were tied as far as bringing new players were in, unless I generated the cash through player sales. There was only one option. I would have to cash in my biggest star and the most popular player at Sunderland. Magic Marco was made available for transfer. It did not make me a popular figure with fans or the board, but I felt I had no choice. I didn't want to sell Marco. I had to for the good of the team.
Well, see, I would dispute that, I have to say.
Can I, lads? Can I just get you to hold fire? Because this is a really interesting part of the story, which I'm going to come on to. And as I've done some digging, there's some quotes from Smith from the time which suggest a different story. So, because yes, Chris, what you've said there, that was how I remembered it. Ever since that happened, that was the scenario that was in my mind, and that's how I've eventually, not quite, but eventually almost got over the saying of Marco Gabbiadini. I will just say, by the way, Martin's already mentioned Joel Lynch today. Chris has had a little nibble at us for when I confused him with Gav on a previous episode. This is a trigger one for me. This whole affair is going to be very tough to talk about. So if you hear Martin dropping in any adverts around here, it's because I've needed a minute to break down and have a tear and compose myself. So yes, there we go. Marco's got back in the goals. He looks to be back on form again. Smith admitted that there was even this possibility he would have been dropped from the team, which is unthinkable a few weeks beforehand. The idea of Marco Gabbiadini being dropped because of poor form is just would have been so hard to get your head around. Kieran Brady, he does have these issues with his fitness at the time. There was an approach from Darlington to take him on loan, but Smith knocks that back. And that's interesting as well, because as we go further down the timeline, we are short in numbers up front. You know, there's a few injuries to other strikers and other attacking players. So the timing of Gabbiadini being sold wasn't ideal in that respect. So yeah, the story goes on. 21st of September, Marco Gabbiadini's last actual game for us. It's a 2-1 loss at home to Grimsby. To be fair, though, there was times in that game where Sunderland were actually decent. I don't know if any of you lads recall being at that game, but you look at the score and you think, however, we shouldn't be getting beaten at home to Grimsby. But I don't think we did too badly. Unfortunately for Gabbiadini, he gets taken off at half-time and replaced by Thomas Hauser. And you maybe look at that and think, oh, is the doubts about his future impacted his performances? But seemingly not. It was a genuine injury he picked up. Just before half-time, a lad called, I think it was Paul Lever, who's come in from behind and wiped him out. Lever got cautioned for it. So it looks to have been a genuine injury that's meant he's had to be taken off. But what a sad way to end your time in Sunderland colours. You know, he is remembered for that hat-trick in his previous game away at Charlton, but this is a proper Sunderland legend in my eyes. For his final appearance to see him hooked at half-time because of injury, it's a bit of a shame. Interestingly, on the night of that game against Grimsby, Paul Bracewell, there's an interview with him in what was then called the Sports Echo. He didn't go in two-footed on Marco, but he was quite critical of some of his performances in the weeks prior. You talk about Dennis Smith being a bit cheeky about Kieran Brady and his weight issues and all of this. You would not get a current player now being a little bit critical of one of his teammates in an interview. Like I say, he didn't go in absolutely two-footed on him, but he suggested that maybe Gabbiadini had taken his foot off the gas a bit, maybe thinking that now he was back in the second division and having done well the higher division the season before. Bracewell suggested that Gabbiadini just assumed the goals would come for him, and had not maybe put in quite as much work, which, yeah, it surprised me to read that. 23rd of September, we go back to this thing about Smith already being low in terms of forward options. Thomas Hauser asked on the 23rd to go on the transfer list. Pasco was already on there. So you've got two players there who the club are willing to let go. Obviously, though, had they been sold, they wouldn't have brought in the types of numbers Gabbiadini did. 24th of September, we play at home in what was then the Rumbelows Cup. So long before the Worthingtons or the Coca-Cola, the League Cup was called the Rumbelows Cup. We lost at home to Huddersfield, and Gabbiadini sits that one out. Again, the reason is injury. It's not because apparently he's got a imminent move on the cards. You then come to the 25th of September, and this is when I think that Smith's comments are interesting, because the back of the Echo, the headline is "Under Fire, Smith looks for cash aid." The article by Jeff Story: Dennis Smith went into a Sunderland board meeting today hoping for the go-ahead to enter the transfer market. The Roker manager has taken increasing flack from irate supporters for the club's inactivity in transfers so far this season. Fans have been forced to live on false promises that their side would be strengthened since relegation. There's a bit of a comment here that some of the money Smith thought he might have had to sell was instead spent on safety improvements from Roker Park. But yeah, Smith is saying things like, at the moment, I haven't got any money. There was talk of spending before the start of the season, but things have changed. People are saying that we have got money to buy because of our position. But the best time to buy is when you are in Middle's position, not ours. Borough at the time were higher up in the table. So, you know, there's starting to be rumblings about money and whether we can spend. Come the 26th, though, which is the day Gabbiadini is actually sold, the article at the back of the Echo starts with Smith ready to spend. According to the Echo and according to Jeff Story again, this meeting with the board the day before was successful. The Roker manager was given the go-ahead at yesterday's board meeting to plunge into the transfer market. Dennis Smith is set to smash Sunderland's transfer record in the next few days. The same day, you've got confirmation that John Wood and John Featherstone have joined the board of directors, and they will bring in a bit of investment. So on the 26th, here we are with Smith apparently set to splash the cash, not sell. So it's a bit peculiar, that. And I think that is why there is then this shock later on in the day when it comes out that Gabbiadini has been sold. I think my memory of this has maybe changed over time. I remember, like it was yesterday, where I was when I was told Marco Gabbiadini had been sold. We had some decorators doing some work in the house, and they knew I was a Sunderland fan, so they took it upon themselves to tell me the bad news that Gabbiadini had been sold. I always remembered that being happening on the day he was sold, but seemingly not. The deal must have gone through quite late on the 26th, and then this decorator has told me on the morning of the 27th. So Martin said there he remembers vividly talking to seeing a friend of his who's a Sunderland fan and just shaking your head. I remember vividly being told that Gabbiadini had been sold. I even know where I was stood in my house. When I go, this is honest to God, when I go back to my mum and dad's house, sometimes if I need to nip upstairs, I remember being stood in the doorway of what was me then bedroom, posters of Gabbiadini on the wall, being told, son, you'll have to take them down. He doesn't play for us anymore. So yeah, I went to school, obviously gutted by this news. By the time I come home, this is a marker of how things were different. Everybody subscribed to the Echo and they got it delivered every night. By the time I got home from school on the 27th, all the news about Gabbiadini's now being confirmed. The front cover of the Echo actually talks not only about Marco being sold, but Durham County Cricket Club had just lined up Ian Botham. So there you go. You've got the Sunderland fans unhappy at losing a player, but there's a sporting incoming happening. What happens with the Echo whenever there's a big story? They send the reporters out onto the streets to do the vox pops. So on page 3 of the Echo, luckily for the reporters sent out by the Echo, they weren't sent onto the into the bridges to collar people and get their comments. The evening before, when it was confirmed that Gabbiadini had been sold to Palace, they were sent to the New Derby to ask a few of the drinkers in there what they thought about the sale, which, they might have been able to get a couple of drinks on expenses, but I wonder if all of their the people they approached were talking full sense at 10:30 on a night. It was mixed opinions. I think most people were not happy to see Gabbiadini go, but felt it was the right thing to do and were wishing him luck. It was Smith who was getting most of the stick for this deal. Normally when a player leaves, all the fans decide he's scum of the earth and he's stabbed the team in the back. Most people were still on board with Gabbiadini and wanted to take out the frustration on Smith. Back in those days when they used to give the name, age and address of correspondents in the paper, there was a lad called Paul Scott who was 22 of Rutherglen Road. He wanted the club to get shot of Dennis Smith altogether. And there was a fella called Ed Young of 44 of Bright Street. I hope I'm not getting us into any sort of confidentiality problems here by giving out the details. He lived in Bright Street, which is right next to, well, not right next to, but it's near the New Derby. He claimed that Marco was the only decent player Smith had ever signed for Sunderland. Which I think is a pretty,
harsh one.
maybe give Ed his due. It might have been late at night. He might have had a couple of strong drinks when he said that. If either of those lads are still Sunderland fans and listening in to us now as we talk, by all means, get in touch and defend yourselves. I was surprised by the comment that Gabbiadini was the only decent player Smith signed. So that was page 3. That was how the fans reacted to it. But on the back of the echo, Dennis Smith is forgotten about Gabbiadini and had apparently made a record-breaking bid for a striker to replace him. The money we made for Gabbiadini, about 400,000 of it had to go to York as part of some clause from the deal. But the rest of the money was Smith's to spend. He didn't name anybody, but Jeff Story was under the impression that we'd gone back in for Ali McCoist at Rangers and that we'd looked to bring him back into the club, which I have no recollection of. I was obviously fighting through the tears by that point and just not paying attention to potential incomings. There's also in this article a mention of Anton Rogan. Seemingly the bid for Anton Rogan had already been made and that could have potentially gone through whether Gabbiadini...
It was actually already agreed on that day that he was going to sign, and he was coming to, and it was only delayed with that announcement because he was on his way down and he suffered a puncture on the way down on Rogan, and that delayed it by 24 hours.
Well, there you go, because again, it just goes back to this issue I'm saying about how the narrative is now different. And I'd always remembered it as we had to sell Gabbiadini to fund the likes of Anton Rogan and what have you, but it's not quite how that happened. The puncture maybe has helped Smith to perhaps suggest that in later years. But yeah, there was this potential Ali McCoist move. There was the Anton Rogan deal coming, about to be signed off. We also had brought in Peter Beagrie on loan, one of Martin's favourites. But that was seemingly literally a month's move. There was no expectation for that to be made permanent. It was because we were short on numbers up front. We just lost Marco. Hauser was injured. Colin Pascoe was carrying an injury. So from that point of view alone, selling Gabbiadini when we did, given earlier on in the day Smith had been quoted as saying he was ready to spend, does seem a little peculiar. The article then goes on to say that Crystal Palace had actually made a double bid, not just for Gabbiadini, but for another player. Does anybody want to have a shout on who that was?
Yeah, Gary Hours?
Yes, Gary Hours. They were not prepared to meet the asking price for Hours, apparently, which had been 1.25 million, and would have also seen Paul Bowden come to Sunderland. Paul Bowden's a name, through his infamous Wales penalty miss, but he was a decent player, him.
Well, also, Paul Bowden was in the Swindon team in 1990, and he long held a grudge against Sunderland for taking Swindon's place in the top flight. And we tried to get him on a couple of occasions, and he wouldn't come. And he put that down as a reason why.
And I actually think the Hours bit, you mentioned that you might be right, Andrew, in the fee, but actually I think Martin's right. I think on this occasion the Hours thing might have went through, but it was Paul Bowden who scuppered it. I'm sure Gary Hours told us that he was on his way, and Paul Bowden went nope, and the deal collapsed.
Interesting. I wonder how that would have played out. Had we sold Hours and Gabbiadini but brought a player in, would that have softened the blow? I think whenever you lose a player, you want to see new players come in.
I don't think so. And I think it's really, all of us saw Marco play. And I think it's really hard to describe to people who didn't see him play just how good he was in that team at that time, in that era. You'd gone through however 5-6 years prior, and there was dull, there was a battle, there was drudgery. We'd fallen from the top flight down to the third tier. And this 19-year-old comes in, and he's fast, he's abrasive, he can score goals, he can hold the ball up, he can go past people. He was brilliant. And he had all the top clubs were watching him. I remember Liverpool being linked with him, Man U being linked with him. All the top clubs were watching him and looking at him. He got called up to the England B team. You go back to the press reports leading up to Italia 90, and all the talk was it was either him or Steve Bull was going to be like the wild card that goes to Italia 90 with England. That's how highly sort of regarded he was. He has a top flight season, and he scores goals, but he's got a few injuries. And I think he carries injuries over into that pre-season, because my memory of the start of that season is he looked a little bit sluggish. He looked as if he's maybe carrying a pound or two extra weight, all that sort of stuff. And what I find is, sorry, Chris, go on.
So just remember, he had that B cap in Division 1 as well.
He did, that's right. Was it in Division 1?
Was that? No, I thought that was because it was at Roker Park.
It was in the lead up to the 1990 World Cup.
I thought it was when we were in Division 1 because you're probably right. But yeah, at Roker Park, and I think he was up front with Alan Smith in that game, wasn't he?
Alan Smith.
He was certainly in the mix for international.
Bobby Robson liked him.
He did. The really interesting thing with all of this, right, is, and we've touched upon a little bit before, when Marco was signed, Dennis Smith wanted to pair him with Keith Birchin. He wanted Marco to play off a big man, right? Birchin got injured in that Fulham game that you referenced briefly earlier, and Eric Gates came in and played alongside him for the rest of that season, and we went up. At the start of that season, afterwards, he signs Billy Whitehurst. Gates gets dropped to the bench. He pairs Marco up front with Billy Whitehurst, big man. Marco was a little man. Billy Whitehurst goes to Hull with Ian Hesford part exchange for Tony Norman, and we signed Thomas Hauser. And Dennis Smith tries to partner Marco and Thomas Hauser up front for a lot of that time. And when you look back through that 89-90 season that we went up, Eric Gates doesn't actually score that many goals in that season. He comes back into the team for a decent spell, but he's not actually that productive. He retires. Peter Davenport comes in. Thomas Hauser does his Achilles at Bristol City in the League Cup, and he's ruled out for that season. Now, I strongly suspect if he hadn't got injured there, we would have seen a lot more of Thomas Hauser up front with Marco that season. So you come into the next season, Thomas Hauser's fit again. If you look at the games that we played so far that season, so you got the Charlton game, which was the 8th game of that season. That's the first time he's put Davenport up front alongside Marco. He's put Thomas Hauser or Colin Pascoe up front with him for the rest of the games so far that season, which we've seen time and time again over the seasons beforehand, that Marco does not play well with a big man. And I think Dennis Smith was so stubborn, thinking he could get a better outcome from Marco playing off a big man. And I think Marco got the hump because he was trying it again.
And I really think that's really interesting, Martin, because this move happened really quickly, because it came like literally a few days after Ian Wright had signed for Arsenal. He'd left Palace, signed for Arsenal for $2.5 million. So Steve Coppell kind of panicked and went, right, we need somebody. But it was to partner Mark Bright.
And that's the irony.
The Bright-Wright partnership. Yeah. And it was interesting, if you listen to the Kevin Day podcast before the Palace game, I asked him about Marco Gabbiadini at Palace, and he just went, it just didn't work with Mark Bright. He said we saw flashes of him, and you've mentioned, that what he could do, Martin, where he could just run with the ball and frighten the life out of defenders because they didn't know what to do with it. this player just running towards him, charging towards him with the ball, but it just didn't work with Mark Bright. And Dennis Smith, like you said, was insistent that this was going to work, but it seemed like when he tried to move on his career and play with a big man, it didn't work either.
So yeah, the Gary Hours business, I actually suspect that Souness was watching Gary Hours at Charlton as much as he was Gabbiadini. Hours was a capable player. This was Smith's comments the day after. So like I say, on the 26th, we've started the day with Smith saying he's ready to spend money and that he's being given the go-ahead by the board. Later on that day, things change. Palace come in. They take Gabbiadini off our hands. This is Smith's instant reaction to it. I have always said every player has a price, and I believe the Marco Gabbiadini deal was good for the club and good for the player. I took stick for bringing him here. I've taken stick this season for playing him, and now I'm taking stick for selling him. So he's got his back up. I have made a profit of 1.5 million. Something had to be done. We were relegated last season and we haven't done too well this season with the same players. Discussions had taken place with Marco about a new contract. He had about 18 months of his current contract to run, but he wanted to keep his options open. I have made one record bid. I have another 2 offers in, so hopefully this will get the club going forward again. That contract business, as you suggest, might be Gabbiadini didn't want to sign because he was sick of being trying to forced into this role with a big striker. You know, there might have been issues there. This business about I've made one record bid, there were suggestions that was happening before Gabbiadini had been sold anyway. So, like Chris said, I was always of the memory that Smith had to sell. Now,
yeah, but I think on that, I think they just knew the money was coming in, and I think in those days the bids were going out.
Perhaps it could have been that. Was it maybe a bluff? You know, if you've got a club wanting to sign a player for you and they've just pocketed a load of cash for Ian Wright, if you make it out as if you've got money in the bank already, ready to go, yeah, like you say, Chris, is it a bluff because they know money's coming in and they just want to get more money from them? I just think it's interesting how you have these recollections and these narratives of a story, but then when you go back to it and actually look at the quotes that were said on the day, it doesn't always quite go like that. Now, you know, there might be reasons for that. Whenever the management are talking to the press, there's a bit of cat and mouse there with what they say. Or is it that in later years, people are happy to spread a different narrative and make out that, oh, listen, I had to sell Marco, my hands were tied. It's just intriguing. That's not a dig at Smith because he was my, manager when I first started going and he did an amazing job. I just do like to go back and look at these things and were they quite as I remembered them? Had they played out differently to how I'd viewed it as a young kid? So there's a discussion you can have another time. Just in summary, though, as Marco himself, as you have said, what a player. Just an amazing player. I was devastated we lost him. For all those fitness concerns that Martin touched on and the speculation, he did score 5 goals in 9 that season. And come the end of the year, he was still our 4th highest scorer in the league. So, even when he wasn't at his best, he was producing the goods. And yeah, he was just so powerful. And whenever you think of him, you just recall him kind of like bursting down the wing, heading towards the box, cutting inside, loads of power, scoring goals, and that little streak of devilment he had in him as well. He had a couple of cards and red cards. He could have a little streak in him. And yeah, him and Tony Norman, they were my first loves. And thank you, Martin, for indulging me. I know you want to get moving on. That's the last I'll say about that matter, unless I'm talking to my therapist, I think.
Well, on that note, we will take another short break. We'll be back very soon.
This episode is brought to you by Contentful. Marketers, you know that feeling when your creative clicks? When that social post sends engagement through the roof? When your outside-of-the-box campaign hits ROI positive? When a personalized homepage turns prospects into customers? It's utter marketing bliss. Contentful helps you create tailored omni-channel experiences without working overtime. No stress, no limits, only possibilities. Get the feels at Contentful.com.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to help you make the most of your summer with Michelob Ultra, a superior light beer worth playing for. Play for it with the guys when you're competing to see who can sink more birdies on the golf course, because winning tastes even better with Ultra on the line. Play for Ultra. Fill your fridge with Michelob Ultra this summer. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
You don't technically need this car. You say that out loud to yourself. You say, I have no space. You say, I'm just looking. Then you click. Then you zoom in on photo number 87 and whisper, oh no. Then you text a friend, the one who always enables you. You say to yourself, this is the last one, knowing it is not. You don't need this car. But maybe, just maybe, this car needs you. Bring a trailer. It's never just a car.
Welcome back to How Are the podcast. As we have just recovered almost from losing Marco Gabbiadini all of those years ago, we will round this week off with the 27th of September, because in 1924, Charlie Buchan scored the first goal in a 2-1 win at Bolton Wanderers, becoming the first Sunderland player to score 200 league goals. 1947, Dick Advocat was born. 1961, Brian Clough scored his first hat-trick for Sunderland as we beat Bury 3-0 at home. In 1980, somebody who we have spoken a lot about already in this episode, Gary Rowell, he scored his first league goal for 18 months. Sunderland beat Leeds 4-1 at Roker Park, and Gary Rowell had struggled after a serious knee injury towards the end of the season that we were talking about earlier. So a few months after that Burnley game that Kelvin described so beautifully, he got injured and he struggled for a couple of seasons, but this was his first league goal back in action. Now, in 1986, we beat Stoke at home 2-0. This was a rare victory around those times. Dave Swindlehurst and a Gordon Armstrong penalty secured that win. But Stoke had 3 players in their lineup with Sunderland connections, one of whom we've certainly mentioned already today. Does anybody have a name for me?
Oh, sorry, what year, man?
1986.
Stoke in 1986. Oh.
Keith Burchin is the one that we've already mentioned.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Paul Bracewell? No. No.
Strutting stuff for Everton at that time.
I've made a fool of myself there, lad. Sorry.
Steve Bold was in the
of
Stoke
course. Yeah.
And Tony Ford was the other player with a Sunderland connection. Now, 27th of September 1989, we beat Leicester away 3-2. And this is a game that Chris and I have spoken about quite a lot. It was in the season that we reached the playoff final. And it's most memorable for me for Gordon Armstrong scoring a goal and then doing some sort of moonwalk celebration at Filbert Street. There's still footage on YouTube of Gordon Armstrong trying to do his very best Michael Jackson impression. 3 years after that, 1992, so after we played in the cup final and all that sort of stuff, Granit Xhaka was born. So 27th of September. And on the same day in 2009, we beat Wolves 5-0 at the Stadium of Light. Darren Bent scored 2. Darren Bent scored 1. He got a penalty. Kenwyne Jones got 2, including 1 penalty. And Michael Turner got 1, as well as an own goal from Michael Mancienne. I think this was a game that Steve Bruce was really pissed off with Darren Bent for letting Kenwyne Jones take a penalty. He really got the hump with it for some reason. I'm not too sure why. We'll move on to September the 28th. Now, this is a little interesting thing in our history. 1893, 1896, and 1889. We played Celtic away in friendlies. Now, given that you're kind of talking, these weren't necessarily pre-season friendlies. Action had already started. On the same day, on those 3 years, we played Celtic away in friendlies. All of the games ended 3-2. We got beat 3-2 in the first 2, and we won the last one 3-2. So it's an interesting little quirk of fate. 1916, Len Dunn's a long-serving outside right was born. In 1958, Kevin Arnott was born. In 1963, Stan Anderson played his 447th and final game for Sunderland in a 3-3 draw against Cardiff City. And obviously that was passed, as Kelvin touched upon, by Len Ashurst. Now, in 1966, we had a testimonial game at Roker Park. We played an international 11 in a testimonial for a player called Norman Clark. Now, this is a team, Jimmy Montgomery was in the Sunderland lineup, Len Ashurst, Cess Irwin, Martin Harvey, Jim McNabb, Neil Martin, Nick Sharkey, Jim Baxter, John Mulhall, all names that we've talked about. Bobby Kerr came on as a sub against a team that featured the likes of Jack Charlton, Bobby Charlton, Mike Summerby, Johnny Crossan actually played for the International 11, Alan Hinton. And this was a testimony for, I think it was a young lad who got a serious injury.
Yeah, he was a prospect, wasn't he, Kelvin? He was a really good player, but he only got to make a few appearances for us. And then in a reserve match, was it his knee ligaments he injured, and that was, in those days, that was game over for you, wasn't it? There was no coming back from that type of injury problem, was there?
He was a left winger, was he? I'm trying
Uh,
to think. I think he was. Was he not Geordie Mulhall's stand-in? Was that the Northern Irish lad that?
yes,
Yeah,
it might
got
well
you.
have been.
Got you.
Like you say, Kelvin, yeah, he didn't play too many games for us, but when he did play, he looked decent. Martin's rattled off a couple of the players who were involved for the international side. They also included Peter Eustace, which was a name that sprung out because in later years he became a coach for us at Roker Park in, I think, the Ken Knighton days. I was interested because I've got a copy of the program here, and there's a little snippet from Norman Clark himself. He specifically thanks Charlie Hurley for his help in getting the opposition involved and getting some of those star names to appear. So we always talk about Charlie Hurley and what a great leader he was on the pitch and all of this, but it seems as well that off the pitch he was a true captain, and this lad, his football career is ruined. He's having to go onto Civvy Street to earn his money from now on. And there's Charlie Hurley. He doesn't have to do this, but he's involved in trying to set up this game and get a decent crowd in for the lad so that a bit of money's raised. And I think that speaks, yet again, that speaks a lot for Hurley as a character.
What was the crowd? Do you know?
It was about 11,000, 12,000, and they had an entertaining night because there was a penalty shootout where Jimmy Montgomery and Ron Springett, who was playing for the international 11, he'd played for England previously. They faced some penalties in a shootout before kickoff, and yeah, it was about 11 or 12,000 there, Kelvin, and they were witness to a 6-6 draw. So it must have been a half decent night's worth of entertainment.
I think it ended up with Jack Charlton in goal for the international 11 and Jimmy Montgomery playing left wing or something for Sunderland. He scored late on, Jimmy, to make it 6-6.
Yeah. Here's a question for you, lads. Once he retired from playing, Norman Clark started teacher training, but then gave that up. He'd returned to Belfast, gave that up, and then moved back to Sunderland. I don't know if he'd met his partner or wife in Sunderland. He worked for a company called Plessy Telecommunications. Now, I have heard that name spoken about loads. I think Ken Knighton might have even done some work for them at one point. Do any of you know who Plessy actually were? Because they were a big employer in Sunderland in the 60s and 70s, from what I understand.
Yeah, definitely a name I know. Don't know much about exactly what they did. I think they might have had a place, and for some reason I want to say to you Blythe as well, but I could be wrong there. Because those lads in my neck of the woods used to work at Plessy's in Morpeth, used to go to work at Plessy's, or either there or Cramlington, one of those two places. Yeah.
I wonder if I had a link with the club, because I seem to remember a few times players would retire and then do a bit of work for them. So maybe there was somebody in the HR department was a Sunderland fan and was happy to give jobs to his to former players and what have you. But yeah, just a company that I've heard of a lot in Sunderland history books, but I've never quite known exactly who they were.
Yeah.
Very good. We will move on to 1985, and George Burley made his Sunderland debut as Sunderland won 1-0. Eric Yates getting the goal. Mick Buxton was the Huddersfield manager, and Steve Doyle and Terry Curran were in the opposition lineup. 1991, the debut of the lone legend that is Peter Reid happened on this day. We got beat 2-1 at Middlesbrough. And this is obviously the first game that we were sort of playing without Marco, and David Rush actually replaced him in the lineup. Paul Hardiman was sent off after 70 minutes. He got into an altercation with John Hendry, who also saw red, and Tony Mowbray and Mark Proctor were in Middlesbrough's team. I think we conceded after about 17 seconds to get the post-Marco life off to a great start. And Bernie Slaven getting that early goal, and Kieran Brady, another person who we mentioned there, came off the bench to score our goal. 2002, David Bellion scored for Sunderland against Aston Villa. We won 1-0, and that was actually Peter Reid's last game at the Stadium of Light in charge. He was sacked after the Arsenal game, which is our next league game, but he won 7-0 at Cambridge. Which is a ridiculous score to win by, only to get sacked after the next game. And the timing of Reid's departure will be something I will argue vehemently all day and all night with people about how right that was, because it wasn't. But we will park that one there, because in 1996, Peter Reid was irate at Highbury, Chris.
Yeah, we're on a bit of a theme today with referees howlers, and I don't know how I'm going to follow the Marco Gabbiadini breakdown, but I'll try my best, gents. Because we'll go back to 1996 for our last one, and this is of course Sunderland's first season in the Premier League, because as we all know, football started in 1992, didn't we? There was nothing in terms of top flight football before 1992 when the Premier League came along. But of course, back in 1996, it was the FA Carling Premiership we'd joined, as it was back in 1996-97. So we, as we mentioned, like when the 1990-91 season earlier, we hadn't been in the top flight since then. Winning Division 1 in Peter Reid's first full season was a bit of a bolt from the blue. Came a bit of a shock to everyone. We'd just survived relegation the season before. So the club was trying to keep up with Peter Reid, and we were, of course, building the new stadium. So it was a big one because it would be the last season at Roker Park. So there was always these rumours about how much Peter Reid had to spend and where the money was being spent on at the club. And as we said previously, in that summer, we broke the £1 million barrier for the first time when we signed Alex Ray from Millwall, then Niall Quinn, a little bit after for 1.3 for Manchester City. Other big signing was Tony Courton from Manchester United. I think the fee was about 650,000, which young people will have to believe me when I say that at the time was a decent chunk of money on a 35-year-old keeper. But he was a good keeper, and we needed one after Alex Chamberlain was let go to Watford, and we couldn't seal the deal for Shea Given. So our Premier League experience got underway. It was at Roker Park, opening day against Martin O'Neill's Leicester City. Niall Quinn nearly nicked all 3 points after having a disallowed goal in the last minute, but it ended goalless. We then went to Forest and picked up our first win. Then went 3 without a win before we played Coventry, which we mentioned last week, which was our first home win in the Premier League. But it came at a cost, and Steve Agnew actually got the winner in that, which we will come back on to. Andrew mentioned early on. But Niall Quinn picked up his knee injury that ruled him out for most of the season against Coventry. He tells a story how Liam Dage was saying he was laying it on a bit thick, apparently, in the tunnel afterwards. And then the nearly came to blows while he was on the treatment table, I think, by the sounds of it. He's Republic of Ireland teammate. Up next were Arsenal. But you've got to kind of put it into perspective. Like I said, we'll come up on a shoestring. And after 7 games, we were doing okay. We'd lost 2, won 2. But we were sitting 10th in the table. And if you looked, we'd actually kept 4 clean sheets in the first 7 games. And one of those games was at Anfield as well. So, it's not like we'd just played teams at the bottom. And actually, it may be no surprise, because if you look, we'd actually only conceded 10 goals all season at home on the way to winning the title the season before. And actually, I was looking, we only scored 8 fewer at home than Watford, who finished second bottom of Division 1 as we won the title. So it wasn't exactly a free-flowing side that won the Division 1 the season before. But, 4 clean sheets in 7 games was a good start, and it was good going to start with. But we kind of got to this Arsenal game, which came 2 weeks actually after Tony Adams came out publicly and said he was an alcoholic. And that was just after he'd captained England during the summer at Euro 96. And that hadn't come long after Paul Merson admitted that he was addicted to alcohol and drugs. But it was, you take those two, and it was a pivotal time in football, because actually the interesting thing from an Arsenal point of view about this game, it was the last game that Pat Rice had as caretaker manager of Arsenal, because this game was on the Saturday afternoon, and on the Monday, Arsene Wenger was arriving to take over. He'd come from Japan to take over at Highbury. So, just very quickly on this, the last ever, and I wanted to kind of read this out because I thought it was quite interesting. The last ever Arsenal side lineup without having Arsene Wenger there. They played 3-5-2. It was David Seaman in goal. They had Martin Keown, Steve Bold, and Tony Adams as a back three. Wing backs Lee Dixon and Nigel Winterburn. So everyone talks about this back four. There was a back five against Sunderland. In midfield, they had Patrick Vieira, who'd come across before Arsene Wenger because he'd kind of already signed him, because he'd signed up to manage Arsenal a little bit earlier. So made Arsenal sign Vieira for him then to come in and take over. And in midfield with Patrick Vieira was David Platt, and Paul Merson was just in front of them two. And then up front was John Hartson and Ian Wright. Sunderland were forced into a couple of changes for the game. Richard Ord was suspended after getting sent off at Derby County, if you remember. Alex Ray came in for the injured Niall Quinn. So Reedy set us up, as he did so many times that season, in a 4-5-1, which frustrated quite a few people. I remember the Southampton game at home, but we'll leave that for another day, I think. So the team lineup for Sunderland was Tony Courtney in goal. At the back, you had Gareth Hall at right back, Martin Scott at left back, and in central defence, you had Lee Howie and Andy Melville. On the right-hand side, you had Steve Agnew. In the middle, you had Paul Bracewell and Kevin Ball, and on the left was Mickey Gray. In the middle as well, you had Alex Ray. And up front on his own was Paul Stewart, who we will get into in a minute. Now, the game kicked off. Paul Danson from Leicester was the man in the middle, which will become significant. It was a sunny day at Highbury. And in the early stages, we were actually the better team. There was an early chance for Steve Agnew at the back post. But then 10 minutes gone, and there's a cross from Mickey Gray, I think. And Paul Stewart tries to get his head on it. And it's a really good cross, and it's fairly close. And he's pushed by Steve Bold in the box and handles the ball. And amazingly, he's given a yellow card for it. So that's the beginning of things. A few minutes later, we could have actually took the lead again. Paul Bracewell played a brilliant ball through, cut Arsenal wide open. Steve Agnew ran in from the right, and then he cut back and left Nigel Winterburn on his arse in the box. And he only had David Seaman to beat, but I think he kind of panicked a little bit. And he was about on the penalty spot, and he put it over the bar. And it really was a really good chance, and he could have put us in the lead. But then it starts to go a bit wrong for us. After 17 minutes, Martin Scott absolutely clatters Lee Dixon with a tackle you'll probably get a red card for now, if we're completely honest. But he gets a yellow for that. Then 4 minutes later, he does pretty much the same again, which he completely mistimes another tackle on Lee Dixon, gets it all wrong, and he's sent off. But this happens right in front of the dugout, and it's this decision that sees Peter Reid storm out from the dugout. And if a manager did this to a referee now, it would probably be on the 10 o'clock news. But he basically was pointing in his chest. I think he told him to calm down a couple of times, and I think he tried, and then just got riled up again. And he was just basically shouting in the referee's face, and he was sent to the stands and took a seat next to John Ficklin up in the stands. So this means 20 minutes gone. We're down to 10 men at Highbury. Peter Reid sent to the stands, but we're doing all right. Arsenal aren't getting much joy, but enter stage left, Paul Danson once again, because with 5 minutes of the first half left, a long ball goes up to Paul Stewart. Now, once again, it's the same person. It's Steve Bold, who I loved in the Sunderland strip, by the way, comes in behind Paul Stewart and pushes him in the back as he's challenging for the ball. So Paul Stewart's hands go up in the air, and he handles the ball again. Now, Paul Stewart's landing to the ground thinking, well, I've heard a whistle, it's a free kick. So he's kind of bringing himself around on the floor. And instead, Paul Danson's waiting for Paul Stewart to stand up because he's got his second yellow card ready. And he sends Paul Stewart off, and Paul Stewart's face at this point he just hasn't got a clue what's just happened, and realizes that he's got to leave the field. Again, we had Kelvin talking about 9 men at Burnley. We've got 9 men at Highbury. You've got, Patrick Vieira in there, Ian Wright, Paul Merson, John Hartson up front, David Platt in midfield. Good Arsenal side. But having said that, and it's interesting as well because Pat Rice doesn't make any changes to make it more attacking. He keeps his 5 at the back. I don't know what he's expecting us to do at this point, but keeps his 5 at the back. But we play really well, and it's a really gutsy performance. And we last until the 73rd minute. 34 minutes we last with 9 men. And it's a cross into the box in the end that lands on the head of John Hartson, who heads it home from close range. And then there's an 88th minute goal with Ray Parlour scoring later on to make it 2. And actually, it's interesting because when you watch the highlights, that second goal comes as we're trying to attack. We almost go through on goal, and they break and get that second goal, which is incredible, really, down to 9 men at Highbury. And the substitutions are really interesting as well, because actually later on, because Alex Ray came off injured, he came off because when Martin Scott got sent off, Reedy reshuffled, brought Alex Ray off for Darius Skibitsky to play fullback. But then later on, he actually brings Paul Bracewell off and Mickey Gray for Craig Russell and Michael Bridges. So he kind of thinks, actually, we might be able to nick a point here with 9 men, which sounds crazy when you think about it. But yeah, it didn't happen. Ray Parlour, and actually Ray Parlour's goal was a decent one. Kind of, he got the ball wide and smashed it in. And yeah, so it was interesting watching the highlights back, because to end with, Barry Davis had some good words at the end of the highlights. He said, Arsenal won the match, but Sunderland won the day. It's the Sunderland supporters who can be proud of their team. And even though we got beat on this occasion, Kelvin mentioned the occasion when we won with 9 men, but the fans you can see the fans at the end still give them a standing ovation. They were chanting for the team. And it was good days, going to Highbury, and we weren't expecting much. And to see a team fighting like that, even though Ted, I want to say Ted Danson there, Paul Danson.
Well, he might have done a better job.
Yeah, exactly. Even though he didn't know the rules, but yeah, Paul Danson spoiled the show, and it was. I mean, Martin Scott was fair enough, but what he did with Paul Stewart was crazy and spoiled the game. Even though we put in a good performance.
Do you reckon the reason Pat Rice, Chris, didn't make any changes was he'd seen the Burnley game all those years before and thought, "Oh, Sunderland with 9 men, this they couldn't pin us back here." Like,
well, he waited until this. It's interesting actually, because he waited until the 71st minute to make a sub, and he actually brought Winterburn off and put Ray Parlour on in his place. Now they scored 2 minutes later, so it's bizarre that he waited all that time with about 20 minutes to go to change from a back 5. I don't know why he thought they needed a back 5. But yeah, so, and actually he brought, he didn't bring Ray Parlour on. He brought a lad called Paul Shaw on, who I remember from the old Championship managers around that time. But actually I hadn't realised he'd actually got on against us. But actually you watch Paul Shaw actually in the highlights, and he comes up a couple of times and seemingly gave them a bit more just because they changed the system and brought one of that back 5 off, which was ridiculous. But yeah, you wonder what Arsene Wenger would have made of this if he was watching the game building up to taking over.
I tell you what, Chris, I'm glad you mentioned Barry Davis's name there, because I looked back on some of the match of the day highlights last night because I knew this was coming up. I had this complete block and I couldn't remember the commentator's name. And I used to love Barry Davies, great commentator. He was quite sympathetic, actually. He was.
He was. He said how good we were. He kept talking about that. And it wasn't like Arsenal were all over. It wasn't. If you again watch the highlights, it wasn't chance after chance after chance. We defended well, and actually, Peter Reid wasn't like this. I was really surprised that he brought Craig Russell on. I mean, this is the manager who at 6-0 up against Millwall didn't make any changes. Martin mentioned another one where he didn't make any changes earlier on, but this one he sticks 2 strikers on when we're down to net 9 men. I think at that point, if you saw his face up next to John Ficklin, I think he just went, well, sod it, let's just go for it.
I think at that stage of the game, we just conceded, so we'd held on, played really well, just conceded a goal. So he's thinking, well, why not? If we get, if we put some pressure on them again, we might get back into it. So He's obviously changed it.
There might have been an element with 15 minutes left of just thinking, well, the game's gone. And actually, he might have been saving Paul Bracewell's legs a bit.
Yeah.
I tell you what, mind you mentioned he was sat next to John Ficklin, which another plug for a previous pod. The chat you had with Ficklin, really good. He comes across as a lovely fella. He must have been gutted when Peter Reid got sent to sit in the stands next to him. He's thinking, I'm having a nice peaceful day watching the match. I've now got Peter Reid next to us, absolutely pulling his hair out.
Well, it's interesting actually because he was sitting up in the stands, as you said, John Ficklin, and this is all going on the pitch against Arsenal. But he said that year we had a really good relationship with Arsenal because we were talking to them over the next few years about their training ground, and we got ideas for them. Then they came to see us about what we'd done with the Stadium of Light, and we had a good relationship with them, according to John Ficklin at the time.
I think it was the referee's fault, not Arsenal's fault, to be fair in that instance.
I mean, this is the thing, because actually, in my mind, I've got the whole, he sent 2 players off, what a disgrace. But actually, when you look back, Martin Scott, he'd be sent off for that first tackle. I mean, Martin Scott lost his head completely, only 20 minutes into the game. And actually, there was only 4 minutes between his first crazy tackle on Lee Dixon. I don't know what Lee Dixon had over him or said to him, but if for some reason he wanted to absolutely clatter Lee Dixon.
It's a funny one because Martin Scott wasn't that sort of player, really, was he? He wasn't the sort of player who'd lose his rag often.
Well, it's interesting. You watch the highlights. It shows kickoff, right? And I think it's Paul Bracewell. He flies in on someone in the first 20 seconds, and it's almost like Peter Reid's just went, get into these. Don't lose the battle. Probably, the Paul Premier Passions thing. Don't lose the battle, because tell you what, when you look at it, you watch the Paul Bracewell tackle, and then there's a couple more, and then Martin Scott does that. So they've got the players right up for this game because they go out in that first 20 minutes and just try to clatter Arsenal.
Martin Scott's an interesting one because you're right. You don't think of him as blood and thunder as a defender. He was quite a clever player, but he did have this hard streak to him. And apparently, isn't he the only one who ever, I think Kevin Ball liked him because Kevin Ball had a conversation with him. And even Bally said was like, oh, flipping heck, Martin Scott's actually he's a hard man. He didn't necessarily show it and he wasn't throwing himself into tackles like a Julian Dix or a Vinnie Jones would all the time. But you wouldn't want to upset him by all accounts. He could look after himself.
In my mind, the era that I grew up, he is about as a traditional fullback as you'll ever see.
Yeah.
Not, proper defender, knew how to defend, not brilliant at getting forward, wouldn't really go on the overlap too much. Good, a dead ball, he was great with a free kick, good with a penalty. Of course, scored the last goal against the Mags at Roker Park with that penalty. I talk about pressure penalty, bloody hell. But yeah, good left footer like that, about as traditional. And I remember when we'd been promoted, there was because we were struggling with left-sided players at the time, around that kind of late 90s. And a lot of people were saying Martin Scott might be worth a shout if he stepped up in the Premier League and did the business. But then it kind of went quiet when we started to struggle, I think.
I think during this season, he was mentioned as a possibility for an England call-up. And he suffered with injuries next season pretty badly, didn't he? And that kind of put all of it to rest.
Well, we've talked before about the kind of the changes Peter Reid made. Was some were luck, some were judgment, and actually, would Mickey Gray have been that fullback that he was at Sunderland if Martin Scott had kept fit?
Not a chance. Because Reid loved Martin Scott.
Was Lee Dixon still in the England setup around that time? He might have said, "Oh yeah, don't bring that Martin Scott into the squad." He said, "Absolute."
Maybe he was trying to crock a fullback. He was trying to crock an England fullback to get a call up.
Oh, to take his place. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But like I said, I mean, crazy. Like you said, he wasn't. You're right, Martin. He wasn't the fullback who would fly in and lose his head. But these 2 tackles were crazy. I mean, like I said, that the first one was ridiculous, and the second one he just got all wrong.
But it's like don't get us wrong. He was a hard defender, and he could put a nasty tackle in. But he always seemed calculated. to me is what I mean. He always did things deliberately.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one occasion I can remember him really losing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I think that's a wrap. We could talk for another 9-10 minutes and make it a full 3 hours, but I think we'll save that for next week. So, Kelvin's had to duck off, so we'll say thank you to Kelvin for sharing all of those memories. Well, the things he can remember from that day in 1978. He can't remember much after 7 o'clock by all accounts, but he remembered things that happened before that, so that is the main thing. So thank you very much, Andrew. Always a pleasure, mate.
Yeah, brilliant. Really, really good episode as always. Loved it to bits. Do we want to quickly fire off a quiz question, or are we going to skip it? Since we're taking up everyone's time.
No. Don't leave people hanging.
Well, I will keep this one short. Next time we sit down and do an on this week, we will be discussing the 29th of September to the 5th of October, I believe. Now, on the 4th of October 2003, we won away at Sheffield United, despite ending the match with 10 men. So, yeah, another Sunderland red card we're discussing there. So, what we'd like to know is who scored the only goal of the game and which Sunderland player had been sent off.
Very good. I think I was there. I'll have to double check. I think I was there. But I will wait until next week's episode to find out. Yeah. And thank you very much, Chris.
No problem. Just another short one today, mate. And Gav's determined to try and get us to squeeze these into hour-long episodes, isn't he?
Well, we'll just have to do an On This Day podcast every day and it'll be an hour long. Hey, you know what? It's brilliant if somebody's marathon training. Like, I'll have to say that. Brilliant fodder for people who are marathon training. So there you go. Could find a niche.
I mean, seriously, we were talking about this. If anyone's all up to date with How We're the Podcast and has listened to every single one of our 200 and whatever it is episodes now, please let us know, because we'd love to hear from you if you've gone through them all and what you actually do to be able to listen to them.
You could drive a lot, couldn't you? I guess if you were driving a lot, you could do that. Or if you were, say if you're doing some marathon training or spend loads of time in the gym or something, but get in touch if you have, because I'm sure you'll be part of a very select club. Probably doesn't even include us. So, yeah. But I think that's a wrap for this week. So thanks to everybody and thank you to all of our listeners. We'll be back next week with another episode of On This Week. And we will, of course, be back tomorrow with some more Sunderland content for your ears. But until then, it's goodbye from us.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.